Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Harmonic Convergence. We are so happy that you've joined us today, and we have an amazing, amazing conversation with the incredible Shinoa Igawa lined up here for you, and she's going to be sharing with us about herself and her work and sharing with us some very important messages about the water. So without further ado, please, Shinoa Igawa, share with our audience a little bit about who you are and where you live, and so they get to know you a little better.
Okay. Thank you, Bita. And it's good to be here with you. And my name is Shinoa Igawa, and I'm here in Washington State. And I come from the Lummi and Sklallam tribes in the coastal area of northwestern Washington. And on my father's side, I also carry Hawaiian and Japanese ancestry. And on my mother's side, Scandinavian and Scottish and English. So a little bit of a world citizen, but here in my home territory of Lummi and Sklallam. And I am a person who engages in many types of work and learning and teaching. I'm an artist and an illustrator, working on a book with my brother now, our second book, and this one's on the water, called The Whale Child, to be out soon. And I'm also a person who carries the traditional medicine of our family, my husband and I, and a person who believes in our teachings, our native teachings, and the wisdom that they have for the earth that I feel is really important at this time. I'm a singer and also a photographer. I love being out in nature and appreciating the natural world, and do what I can to stand up for the earth when I have the opportunity. So thank you for inviting me, Bita. I appreciate it.
It's an honor to have you here with us. And you mentioned a little bit about the wisdom of the earth that you carry and those messages of the earth for humanity at this time, for the people of the world at this time. And I would love for you to divulge into that and share with us what you feel is the most important messages that really need to come through right now.
I feel like there's so many things going on in the world today. But I always come back to the teaching that everything is interconnected, that we're all interconnected, that we are part of nature, that we're made of nature, and through the grace of nature and each of the elements and the spiritual beings that are a part of the earth, the fire, the water, the air, the sun, the moon, the stars, the plants, the animals, that when they all come together in a balanced way, they give us life in each and every moment. And I feel like there's a lot of struggle and strife that's going on in the world, and there's change that needs to happen, most definitely. And I feel that I have a special hope that we remember the earth in this time, because the earth is the one that ultimately is supporting us. And without our Mother Earth, it doesn't matter what battles we have, none of us might be here, under the circumstances, because we're on a path now that we've seen is not sustainable. It is taking us further and further from the understanding that we are a part of nature, and that our responsibility to nature is not really a part of the education that our children are receiving. And so, just going to school and learning and feeding the mind, feeding the brain. One of our teachings is, the heart is the one with the wisdom. The gut is also the one with the wisdom, the gut instinct, the intuition. And it's not just the brain and being smart. It's about being wise, and it's about being observant and learning from our surroundings, and seeing the small things in the natural world that are occurring all the time that are huge miracles, and allow us to be here at all. So I really hope that through this conversation, we can accentuate that there's action that needs to be taken, not just speaking. That speaking is a good thing, to have the conversations and have the dialogues, but it's actually our action, and looking at how each one of us can take action. And some of us are in better positions to do that, especially if we come from, this is the so-called developed world, which developed is you can see what that means from different angles. But I feel that, you know, in the developed countries, we have more responsibility because we're the ones that are destroying nature faster than the rest of the world. And so there really needs to be partnership with people who have the ability and have the good fortune of living a life in more or less in a free way, that it's really, there's a bigger responsibility for this category of people, you know, middle to upper class at this time in the developed world, to really step it up and to create unity with people outside of their own circles, and step into somebody else's shoes to really see what the situation is, so that there can be understanding and appreciation across cultures and across borders, that these borders are man-made. They're not human-made. And when we start talking about the water, we can give examples of how nature knows no borders and gives generously and freely to all of us.
Yeah, amazing. I definitely agree. And the action piece is such a critical piece. And a lot of people are currently looking for ways to be proactive and take action and be a part of the solution and part of that change that we all want to see. So what do you feel in your path and your walk? How do you see the most effective forms of action to be taken right now by people who feel like they want to step up and make a difference?
I feel like there's many different answers to every kind of question. And I feel like there's layers in this one as well, where it's about first taking responsibility within ourselves. And if we're able to do that, if we have that freedom to observe and learn about how we're living our lives and ask the questions whether this is a sustainable way of living, where we're buying things from, is it ethical, is it sustainable, is it something that's helping life, or is it something that's harming life? Is it, if it's just for the sheer purpose of pleasure or entertainment, it might not be helping. And maybe that, I think about this often lately, that everyone's work, if it would just shift a little bit to include the importance of being a life-giving, healing offering, and not just a financial avenue to make money, at whatever cost. You know, for instance, going to school to become a mining engineer is not very helpful to the world at this point. And it's like, it's just, that's just one example. But I mean, I think that there has to be a shift in our consciousness at this time as to how we have been living and seeing kind of the rat race of the first world or the modern world, and understanding that we have to kind of put our own brakes on and take a look. And the COVID has been very helpful in that, because we've all been forced to, which has been a miracle in and of itself, to have to come to a complete stop and not be able to go back out and let the earth take a breath and let the earth feel like she can rejuvenate herself, because we just take all the time. And now I just thought it's very hurtful, the lives that have been lost and the hardship that has come. But I also see the miracle of the possibility that is here for us if we can really pay attention to what's happening right now, and we can really take this time to wake up. And so I think it starts within ourselves, and then it starts within looking at our own critical way of thinking. I feel like as humans, oftentimes we can be really egocentric. We can think for ourselves, and what's the best thing for me, and how do I feel about this, and what do I want for myself, and I think we have to start thinking about other people. We have to start thinking about helping each other, and we have teachings around that too. They say, you know, every day of your life when you wake up, you must learn something new and you must help somebody with something. And so if you're just living a life that's mostly self-serving, then you need to kind of reset and look at where you can give back, and that everything that comes around goes around. And so what you give, that happiness and that helping hand, and that ability to let go of your judgments and your stereotypes and thinking that people are so different from you, instead of appreciating the wisdom that they might have and the culture that they might have and the wisdom that might come in that culture and the languages and the knowledge about the land and the plants and their way of life, is the miracle of being on this earth in a multicultural world, and to just have a homogenous way of living in the city, in this modern world where we just keep getting further and further from nature. We're missing the point of what it means to be diverse. And nature itself shows us the diversity. It shows us the brilliance of the creation that is here, the spiritual beings of the earth and the sky, and how the creation occurs in so many thousands of different ways that are miraculous and amazing and beautiful. And that's where the wisdom is, and that's where the healing is, and that's where the teachings are. That's where they come from. And so if that is not a part of our life, then we're getting off track. And so paying attention to those things, being involved in unifying where you can, being involved in stopping simple things like drinking water out of a plastic bottle, and why the plastic bottle, and who's making the plastic bottle, and what are they doing with the rights of that water, and how are those things taken from everybody who should have a human right to have clean water. Let's look deeper into things and not just pick something up and just do whatever with it and not think about it, because we have to look deeper into where things are coming from and where they're going from here, and how they're affecting us, and how they're affecting the earth, and how they're affecting other people. And so we as citizens, as the people, we need to rise up, because if we're going to just sit here and wait for other people to take care of everything for us, then we are not going to be taken care of. We have to really, and that's why I came to speak today. It's like, I'm no expert, but I have a voice, and I have a love for this earth, and I have a responsibility by having this voice. And therefore, even though I'm not an expert, I will stand up for the earth, and I will stand up for the water, and I will stand up for life, and do my part to the best of my ability, because why should I sit back and be quiet when there's something that needs to be said, you know?
Absolutely. And you mentioned the water, and you mentioned the simple shift in, for example, not drinking water out of a plastic bottle. Mm-hmm. And how to really stand up for the water. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, well, why should we stand up for the water? What does that mean? And for example, what we learned with the Standing Rock situation was that saying of Mani Wichoni, water is life.
Yes.
And today in our alignment, there is a movement happening with Neptune that really rules water. And so water is a theme of our day energetically on our planet right now. And so in your relationship to water, tell us a little bit about why it's important to stand up for water and how.
Okay. Yes, water is life. And that is what we understand as Indigenous people. We know that water is life. We know that coming into this world, onto this Mother Earth, that it is through water that we're conceived. It is through the seeds and the transfer of the egg and the sperm that are traveling through those sacred water, and the water that surrounds us when we're in the womb and takes care of us and nurtures us the whole time. And it's the water that breaks before our mother gives birth, and the water that goes onto the earth and returns itself to the earth, and that agreement that's made between the human mother and the Mother Earth to care for this new life, this new child. And throughout every day of our life, water is a sacred part of our life. Without the water, we can't live. Water is one of the first elements that came together with our grandfather fire and formed around the grandfather fire through a process of the way that it came into the condensation, a process of condensation. Through our ancient stories, there's stories about how this occurred, and the wisdom of our grandfather fire and our holy water spirit. It's not just an element, it's a spirit, it's a living spirit. And the water is one of our number one healers, because we know that water can heal us, that water is one of the most malleable elements. When you project your feeling, when you put your prayer, when you talk to the water, when you speak to the water has its own way of it's listening with its ears and its feeling, and it becomes what it is that you put into the water. If you have a positive thought and a positive prayer, the water will listen to you and it will transform itself. And this is something Native people have known from forever. And until science came along and said, this is how it is, then people started to believe it. But we know through our ceremonial ways and through our teachings and our creation stories that it's always been that way, and that water is always a part of our ceremonies, and that water is something that many of our people still, as Native people in this country, have to go and haul water. We don't even have water running into our homes in some places on the different reservations around this country. And there's a relationship with the water that it's highly honored and highly respected and taken care of. And oftentimes I work with children, and I will go into the classroom and say, ask the children, where does your water come from? Where does it come from? And they say, it comes out of the faucet. It comes right out of the faucet. That's it. And so we talk about that. Where does the water come from? And the water comes from the sacred mountains that are upon our Mother Earth, that most cultures, most traditional indigenous cultures of each country have their sacred mountains. And on the top of those sacred mountains, there's the male rain and the female rain, that there's always the male and the female, that there's always both sides there. In other cultures they call it yin and yang, or the male and the female, the light and the dark, the day and the night. The male and the female rain, they come together, the male rain being the heavy rain, the strong rain, the thunder gods, the lightning, the female rain being the mist and the soft rain that comes. And the mixing of the male and the female rain in the same way that we conceive as human beings to create life, that is how our holy water spirit conceives and creates the youth rain, the fresh rain that's born on top of the mountain. That then from there it comes down the mountain, and it nourishes everything all the way down the mountain, all the plants, the forests, the animals, the streams, the rivers. It goes all the way down, and sometimes goes underground and goes deep within the earth. And it goes all the way out to the ocean, and it goes back into the ocean, and it cycles itself. And it has a wisdom of how to purify and cleanse itself. And it has non-judgment. It feeds and nourishes everything in its path. And so if you want to understand something, you can pray to the water, and you should take care of the water, because you are the water. We're made of water. But it's not just that we're made of water, it's that it's a living spirit. It's alive. And if we want health, we have to take care of the water, because we are made of water. And we appreciate and love that spirit. And when we pray to the water comes, the rain comes, and the rain acknowledges us. And there's a relationship with the natural world. And again, I think that our children are just not learning it because they're just not taught. Because the people who have decided about what our children should learn have an ulterior motive to maintaining the status quo of what is beneficial to the people who are deciding for everybody what should be taught. When in fact, if we were, because they know how powerful it is. That's what I think. Because when they come and they see a strong tribe or a strong community then they don't want you to be strong. They want you to be a follower. They want you to not be able to think for yourself. They want you to not remember your divinity and the sacred origin, that the way that the sacred water brought you into this world, the way that you took that sacred breath of life, the way that the sun was, the way that the moon and the stars were at the time you were born, and the way that we carry the voice of our ancestors, the way that we stand with the bloodlines that run through us from all the wisdom and experiences of the ones that walk before us. And so we have to remember the water. And there's places where, so many places on the earth where people are trying to stand up for that. And the mining companies are why is it? Why, my fellow people out there, why is it that there's certain ones who could make decisions about what's done with our water? Why is it that water can be privatized and that water can be contaminated because of different chemicals that are being mined and destroying entire water resources for huge regions, and bottling up water and selling it to us, and buying up all the aquifers around, doing studies and seeing where the water is at? And so it's up to us again. It's like we must pay attention in a different way now. We cannot be sheep anymore. No offense to the sheep, because those are also a part of our family and our relation. No, we cannot be followers anymore. We have to look at what it is that's really giving us life, and we have to be willing to make a stand. And if we're not, then what are we really doing here? Are we just here for pleasure and entertainment? Or are we thinking about our children? Are we thinking about our grandchildren? Do we love our children and our grandchildren? Do we want them to know the natural world? Do we want them to understand that they have a foundation upon this Mother Earth through the sacred teachings, through our grandfather fire, and through our ceremonial ways, and through our water of life, and through the sacred breath of life, and the understanding of how things go, and the offerings that are made, the way that there's respect, that there's reciprocity, there's an acknowledgement that you give thanks, you're grateful, you're not just, oh good, here's some more water, oh good, here's this, oh give me that, just kind of like spoiled children. Maybe we act like spoiled children. We don't remember that we're supposed to honor these things. And that's in our teachings too. All of our stories, all our oral tradition talks about when you take something from nature, you make an offering, and you make a prayer, and you give thanks, and you only take what you need. You only take what you need, and you see who else needs that within your family, within your community. And if you're an able-bodied person, you help them and you bring that to them. But you don't take so much. You just don't go in and just wipe the whole thing out, and then there's nothing left. There's an understanding of the way that the cycles move, like the salmon, coming up the river after being out at the ocean and coming to spawn upriver. And the first salmon that come up the spring, up the stream, you're gonna bring that fish into the longhouse, and you're gonna make offerings, and you're gonna say prayers, and you're going to talk about these things, the gratefulness of how in our ancient stories, the animals and the different ones, the fish and the different plants agreed to help us humans. But there was a relationship that must be maintained. There was a respect and an appreciation and a care that needed to go into it. And these are the things that have been lost. These are the things that are not happening in very many places anymore. And I feel that Native people could be in the conversations, that there need to be Native people in the conversations, because there's still a lot of Native people who carry this wisdom. And I feel like it's the hope for all people, and I feel like it's been a long time of disconnection, and it needs to come back around again.
Yeah.
To remember.
So critical. You've said so many so many important things in that statement, in that answer. And one of our focuses today is the leadership of love, what guides your every action, and wanting to envision a world and a society and a culture where the leadership is motivated by love instead of anything else that's self-serving or short-sighted. So how do you see leadership coming from a place of care and love versus coming from a place of extractive, self-serving, short-sighted benefits? And how can we go from where we are now to where we want to be? What is that bridge looking like when we want to be leading from a place of love?
Mm-hmm. I think, there are many people who know what that feels like, to love and to care and to, I feel like, again, it comes back to working with ourselves in some ways, because I feel like there's certain character traits and personality traits that prevent us from being true and honest and really being loving and really being respectful for real, and not just pretending.
Yeah.
And I feel like when you have your family, you understand what that's like when you love and care for them, and having that relationship with the earth too. And so maybe it's getting out and taking notice of what is going on in the natural cycles in the different seasons, and maybe picking a place to go out and to see the mountains and to see the way that the water is forming, through the snow and through the glaciers, and then the coming down in the spring and the summer, this fresh water that's purified for us. And absolutely, you fall in love. You can't help but fall in love, or at least speaking for myself. The more that I go into the teachings that have been left here for me by my ancestors, I am naturally in love, and I remain curious, and I remain open, and I remain interested in learning, and I remain interested in understanding. I have had to go through my own feeling about hanging on to things that I don't need to hang on to. And it's, and trusting life, and looking at the temporary time that we have in this body, in this life, and what are we going to do with it? And fortunate for me, I felt something pushing me all the time, like, get back on track. Something tells me, get back on track and do it, do it now. And I think that, that love is extremely important. And in fact, some of the world leaders that I think the Dalai Lama says that, that love may be the new religion, that there doesn't need to be a religion, that if there's real love, then things can come from that, and there doesn't need to be the structure, and there doesn't need to be the division and the separation and the segregation. And I know that, there's a lot of conversations through this presentation that's happening through Harmonic Convergence about the unity, and seeing that we're all a part of this ecosystem, this Mother Earth, that we think, I don't know where that idea comes from of thinking we're so separate, but it's a very, it's a very sad part of the human nature. And it's also been there from the beginning of time. It's one of, as the Buddhists say, it's one of those seeds that you might want to stop watering, because it grows into an ugly monster, and it grows into hatred, and it grows into racism and discrimination, and it grows into hierarchies, and it morphs into being very destructive, because it's not life based on love. Because if it's life based on love, it doesn't destroy everything. If it's life based on money and making money and having fame and having all this glory for myself, then it's destructive. It's very destructive. And so if it's loving, it gives to life, it supports life, it helps life, it heals hearts, it heals our children, it heals our relatives, it heals people we don't even know that we can be kind to, whether we know them or not, because we share this existence that's very sacred and very special. It's a miracle that each one of us are here. And somehow may our minds open so that we can come to this understanding. And maybe it comes through, the hardships that we're going through now, because in stubbornness, sometimes it takes severe movements like this to happen to the point where we actually can crack open a little more. But it's opening the heart, continuing to open the heart and to monitor ourselves when we're being judgmental or critical or closed-minded or lacking perspective or thinking. They say there's the perspective that each one of us has is just our own. And then everybody sees the world in a different way. And so there has to be an understanding on how to communicate effectively and thinking simply about the earth. Life should be more simple, and there's enough to go around. And so it's I love what's been happening through this time with COVID about all the gardens that are coming out again and growing our food, and listening to some of the world leaders about not the world leaders, but people like Vandana Shiva, and listening to them talk about, the women who are working with the plants and the seeds, and the people who are taking care of our seeds, and the people who are fighting for the food sovereignty, to have our sacred seeds, our heirloom seeds from thousands of years ago, and to have the diversity of the seeds, and to be able to plant our own food, and to be able to eat our own food, and to be able to have this clean water. And so love comes in many, many, many forms, but it's kindness too. And it's a word I've been seeing more everywhere I go and hearing it. Kindness. What is kindness? It's not that hard to be kind. And sometimes it's again, that's so many layers, because everybody's got their different beliefs and thoughts. But as more of us can be kind, and then come together, be kind and come together and find solutions, because we are intelligent and we need some wisdom to guide our intelligence. We're not just book smart, because if we just got smart from a book, we're not really putting it into action. We're just reading it and regurgitating it. So we have to do it and do it together, and care for one another, and be willing to hear each other, and to be able to try to understand from what we're hearing, and quit taking everything so personally. Just listen, and out of curiosity. I always think of children, like the way that our children come into this world, and they're curious and they're open and they love everything and they love everyone, and everything is interesting and everything is new. And it's like, if you could have a fresh vision like that, and bring back that curiosity and freshness of a child, then life is just, can be so beautiful. It's our attitude, it's our positivity, it's our hope. Those things make life beautiful. Those things make life beautiful, even in the hardest times. And so there has to be positivity. You have to work on those negative things and turn them into something positive. Just the way that they say the Mother Earth can recycle it for us, and the Mother Earth can take these things and make beauty from them. But let's take care of her, because she's taking care of us. It's our mother. We need to do this. And bringing our children, helping our children, because in this book that we wrote, The Whale Child, we've really left the responsibility to our children. And that is not, that's not very responsible for us elders here. We've left we're leaving a mess for our kids. And so think about it. What do we want to leave our children? Sometimes you hear the news and you're like, oh my God, I have no more hope. It's like, you better get some hope. If you have some kids in your life, you better be hopeful, because they need you to be hopeful, and they need you to tell them, help me, you know, come on, let's do this. There's always a way. There is always a way. And that's what I learned from our teachings too. There's always belief. There's always faith. There's always a possibility. And so action, action, action. Let's do it. You know, that's what I think, you know, and love comes from teamwork. Love comes from a hard task and bringing people together and having everyone work with you. And then it's fun. It gets done quicker and you get to enjoy each other's company and it's teamwork. So there's this whole illusion of living in isolation and having single unit families is so not good, so wrong. And so it's created this status quo of how people think they're supposed to live. And when you have children and you're living by yourself, trying to raise your child by yourself with no family around and no friends around, you see how ridiculous it is. We are communal people. Humans are communal. We're meant to be together. We're meant to help each other. We're meant to have multi-generations to teach our children because every generation has a different offering at that point in their life. And so coming back into community, you know, coming back into community and really reaching out across your comfort zone. I think I like to stress that too, because don't be afraid of somebody because you don't know who they are. You know, everyone has a story. Everyone has a beautiful story. Even the tragedy of their story is beautiful. And especially when you help them to overcome that tragedy or bring that healing, it's the most beautiful thing ever. And so be more open to people you don't know and be more respectful and helpful and take it on to do something each day for somebody, and that somebody can be a human or can be the earth, or you know, do something to say, okay, what's my part in this change? What's my part in this transformation? Everybody has a role, and that's another teaching of our Native people. They say, don't teach everybody the same thing. Don't teach them the same thing, because then they won't need each other. You know, everybody has all these skills, and it doesn't matter if that person has them. I already have them. But in a society, we're supposed to we're all born with our unique gifts, and we need that gift to shine in order to make sure that the rest of the world is receiving the part that we brought specifically to add to the whole, so that it could be whole. And so when we cut people out and when we push them aside, we're missing out. And so be open and help people to bring their gift out and help them to believe in their gift and believe in and the gift comes from the heart. You know you're on track because the gift makes you happy when you express it. It's like your heart is like, yes, that's it. It's not like, oh, my gift, yeah, I'm struggling, I'm suffering. It's like, no, that's not the gift. It comes from happiness. It comes from love. It comes from joy. It's meant to make you happy because it wants you to recognize, hey, this is part of why you're here. Bring it, you know. So I was thinking about that, you know, love will break your heart and humble you to the core and show you the beauty. There's everything about love, all of it, all the feelings, but ultimately it brings you to a place of deep humility and humbleness about the passing of time and about the amount of time that we have in this life and where we're going to go from here and how our spirit's going to carry on from here. And if we could, you know, I think that's why the people who have the near-death experiences are, you know, they pass on for a while, but somehow they're revived. Somehow they catch it, they wake up. But it's like, we just need to wake up now and remember that we don't know how much time we have, you know? We don't know how much time we have. And so it has to be, each day has to be the blessing, and we have to make the best of every single day that we have and do something helpful and useful for this earth. So
Amazing. Wow. So profound. So much wisdom in what you're sharing. And I'd love to hear more about your authorship and the books that you've written and illustrated and created with your brother. I understand that your second book is about to be published.
Mhm.
So I'd love to find out more. Please share with us.
Okay. Yeah.
Books.
So the first book is called Tawny's Search for the Heart, and it was one that we self-published together. My brother's name is Keith Igawa, and we wrote that book, and it's kind of based on how we used to feel around our great grandma and the time that she lived in, being born in the late 1800s, up on the Sklallam Reservation, or the Sklallam territory out here in the Puget Sound, and then traveled by canoe to live up at Lummi when the reservations were established. And just feeling that gap between the way that she lived her life and gathering and fishing and really working with the land and being a part of the land, also being in the boarding schools. And so it's about this little girl that doesn't really fit in school, but what she's being taught is what her grandma is showing her, and she ends up bringing that knowledge to the other kids, and they end up building a cedar canoe that there's a cedar tree that talks to her and tells her, I want to be that canoe for you and for the other kids. And so that story, it's Tawny's Search for the Heart, that everything that you're looking for in the world is already in your heart. And that the journey is, any hardship that you go through, you already have the answer for it. It's right here in your heart. And so that's Tawny's Search for the Heart. And then The Whale Child is one that we're getting published through North Atlantic Books, and it's coming out September 8th. And it's a story about a special whale child, the way that all of our children are special, the way that every child is born with a gift. And this child's gift is to be transformed by the water spirit into a human child for a short time in order to meet his family on the land, a little co-Salish sister that he has and his human mother, and to share teachings about the oceans and the water and what's happening to our oceans through his perspective as a whale, and coming to teach his little sister, his little human sister, in understanding that she is taking on this responsibility with the other children. And so it's a story that was inspired by a real dream that my sister had the night before our nephew was born. And she dreamed she was swimming in this beautiful tropical water that was shallow, and there was a whale swimming there. And she swam up to the whale, and she looked into the eye of the whale, and it was looking back at her. And then the eye just went black, and then in that eye was a baby's eye, and the baby was looking back at her, and it had a certain kind of blink where the eyelid would kind of stick, and then it would kind of pop open. And she woke up right after that, and she told her husband, the baby's coming, we need to go to the hospital. And she forgot the dream. And so when he was born, it was a very intense time, because she went through labor for 46 hours or something, very, very difficult. And I went out to make a prayer at that time, and I was really worried and stressed out for my sister, because she was suffering. And I called upon all our ancestors, and I was kind of upset. I was like, where are you? What are you doing? Get over here. Look at her. You know, I was just like, ah. And I went back in, and my dad was sitting on the side of the bed with my sister, and he had his eyes closed, and he was crying. And we said, Dad, why are you crying? And he said, all the grandparents are here, and there's somebody with them. And then in that moment, then my nephew came, my sister's son. And so we always called him our whale child, you know, and the way that it is with our native teachings, it's like when you come into the world and you're given a name. And so he was given a name, and and they say, you know, don't drag that name in the mud, you know, uphold that name, have respect for it, have respect for the ones who gave you that name, and take your responsibility and remember who you are. And I felt that calling, like, you know, we need to write this book for him so he remembers who he is, and he remembers his divine origin and his spirit and his purpose. And so the book was written and just ended up containing all the teachings about the water and the magic that exists in this world that has been here all the time, that we just have turned a blind eye to in a lot of times here, because we don't notice these things anymore. And so it's bringing back that magic and bringing back the hope that it's definitely has places where his little sister's like, what are we going to do about this? Just the way that people think, what are we going to do? We're in deep here. We've made kind of made a mess of things. How are we going to get out? But it's like, you always have to have that hope, and you always have to take that first step. You always have to move in that direction. You can't take on the whole thing at one time. You got to just start moving. And so The Whale Child it'll be out September 8th. And we're feeling really happy because it's just a major accomplishment filled with a lot of prayers and a lot of hope for teaching our kids and for families to share it with their children. And for suggestions, there's also a part in the back that talks about the Coast Salish people and the tribes of Washington State and the western Washington State along the coast, and some of the environmental issues that have taken place in this area, and stopping the coal terminal up at Lummi, and so just a book that will bring a lot of conversation and a lot of suggestions on how children and their families and maybe teachers and schools can start to bring some of this type of education in, so that kids are not going to be caught off guard with the immensity of what is before them. And it's out of love. The book, it comes from love. You know, we're talking about love, and it's the love for our children, the love for our child, and for our nieces and our nephews. And so that's how that book came about.
Amazing. So exciting. Can't wait for the book to be published and to get a copy and to share it. And I'm so grateful that you and your brother have chosen to share such a private and personal story with the world, in the hopes of inspiring parents and children to remember these teachings. So I'd like to shift gears and talk a little bit about this harmonic convergence. A lot of our focus here is we're partially focused on our planet and everything that we've talked about today, and what our Earth needs, and really waking up and taking action and coming into right relationship with ourselves and the elements. And then the other part is looking at the stars and the galaxy, and looking at our planet as part of an even greater ecosystem. Just like we have ecosystems within the planet is also a part of greater ecosystems. And the messages that have been coming through the cosmic consciousness and intelligence has been very much consistent with the message of this Earth. Your Earth is it's not a resource for your life, but it's the source for your life. Mm-hmm. To reconfigure the way we relate to Earth as the source of life, not a resource for life. And it's as if the star beings or the other intelligences in this vast infinite universe really want us to get that at this point. So in our final conversation here, what are your thoughts about that it would help us as a humanity, as a human family, to remember that we're part of an even bigger constellation within the universe?
Mm-hmm. I think what I would, yes, I mean, obviously we come from the Earth and the stars. We come from the Earth and the non-earthly elements. And a lot of our native people have stories about coming from the different stars. And so, you know, again, when you look deeply into anything, you can see where you could follow a deeper story and a deeper an understanding of that. I'm always taught to just look at my 2 feet upon the Mother Earth, and I believe in the guidance from the ancestors, and I believe in the prayers and the guidance of people who care and spirits who care. But I also believe that we're supposed to focus on our own 2 feet and see where we're standing. Mm-hmm. And we're supposed to be aware of how we're walking upon this earth, and that we're to be aware of the spirits that are here helping us. In our native way, they say that, pay attention to what's right here. It's there's the fire sitting right there, your grandfather. Here's the Mother Earth. You're walking upon your Mother Earth. You're sitting upon your Mother Earth. Here's the air you're breathing. Here's the water you're drinking. Here's the plants. Here's the, look at what's around you. Don't send your mind way out there, because you're going to forget where you're standing. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, we're connected, but our work is here, or maybe we would still be out there, but we're here for a reason. So pay attention to what we're doing on the earth. And believe in that too, but don't let it get distracting, and then you forget what you're supposed to be doing. And I think it's the same way with some of the teachings of the Buddhist and the Taoist people. Or when you encounter something fantastic that comes from somewhere else in another world, and it's not meant to be distracting. If it distracts you from your focus, then you screwed it up. So pay attention to where you're at, and bring your mind home to your body, bring your mind home to your heart, bring your mind home to the feeling of your feet when you get out of bed. You sit up and you put your feet on the ground and feel your feet and walking on the earth and being present, because I think that's the thing, that if we're not going to be present, then a lot of things can go on that wouldn't go on if we, it's like, if you're not present, there's a lot of things that can happen without you even knowing. So stay focused, because the wool has been pulled over our eyes many times. So know where you stand, know who you are, know what you're doing, pay attention. Don't let your mind go way out there, because this is here where we're working right now. They say when it's time to go out there, you're going to know about that, or you're going to remember. I believe it's our memories in our DNA too. And I believe that some of those memories come back when they're meant to. Not everybody is meant to remember them. Some people are meant to. Some people are meant to specifically stay focused. And so I believe, yes, there's life. There's more life than here. And yes, it's a miracle that we're here on this earth. Yes, it's a miracle that this earth exists. It's even through the pain and the suffering that we go through as human beings, it's a miracle, and it's worth it. And we have to pay attention to coming home to ourselves. We have to come home and be present, pay attention. What does it mean to have one thought? What does it mean to stop your mind from running all over the place? And just be able to focus and concentrate and meditate and observe and see what's going on and appreciate it, and not be thinking about 100 different things. Because when we're doing that, we're not really here. It's just you're somewhere else, and we have this body for a reason. This body is carrying our spirit for a reason. So pay attention to the wisdom of this body too, this wisdom that's trying to help us to remember that we're a part. We have a biological clock point right here. This is the one that tries to reconnect us to the earth, to the waking up in the morning, to the sun setting at night, to the seasons, to the cycles, and all the teachings that are right in front of our eyes. So we don't have to go too far. We got to look what's being taught What is the forest showing us? The forest is showing us tolerance. The forest is showing us that there's many different species from all different varieties, and they grow in harmony together, and they stand patiently, and they're tolerant, and they help each other to grow. And so I feel it's important, but I feel like we need to focus here, what's going on here. Yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Shinoa Igawa. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor to share your teachings and messages with our global audience all around the world. And if anybody wants to get a hold of you and find out more, maybe get a copy of your book, how can they best reach you?
I think the website should be working by then, www.swanclan.com, SWANCLAN.com. And yeah, I think that's the name. Just looking up the name, and there might be other ways to connect there also.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And we'll just look up Shinoa Igawa's website, www.swanclan.com, and you will have access to her books there, and maybe even some of her photography, and you can contact her directly from her website.
And some of the songs too are on there. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and the incredible songs. That's a real treat. Thank you. Thank you for this time, Shinoa and everybody else, and we will talk to you soon.
Okay, take good care. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Alabao al gran creador y formador del universo, siempre se dan las gracias. Gracias, oh corazón del cielo. Gracias, oh corazón de la tierra. Gracias, oh corazón del agua. Gracias, oh corazón del fuego. Oh cuatro vientos que respiramos el corazón de nuestra vida. Te damos siempre las gracias. Te pedimos el permiso para que nos abras el camino en las cuatro direcciones. Gracias, abuelos y abuelas Balanguichea. Oh Palomá, dador de vida. Gracias, abuelos y abuelas Malamagacho Mijá. Gracias por cuidarnos, por protegernos en la caída del Padre Sol. Gracias, abuelo Oigbalam, abuelo Kakishaja, manantial, nacimiento de las aguas, donde nacen, surgen el agua que corre en nuestras venas, nuestra medicina, el sanador de nuestra vida. Gracias, abuelo Mahukuta Sunuña, postrados en el ocaso del viento, donde recibimos el alimento sagrado de toda la producción que nos da la Madre Tierra. Gracias por darnos todo lo necesario, el alimento sagrado, el alimento espiritual, nuestro vestuario, el producto de nuestro trabajo. Gracias te damos. Te pedimos por nuestros hermanos menos válidos, que no tienes un pie, un brazo, un ojo, que no haga falta, la abundancia que haya siempre en todos los hogares.
Patience is really about trust. I see trust as like planting a seed. When you plant a seed in the garden, there is droughts that come, there are insects that come, so you have to tend the seed. But if you tend it, it wants to grow and it will produce amazing things. And if you want to teach children patience, have them plant a garden. You know, even those little cups with the seeds in kindergarten, that teaches patience beautifully. If you want to teach children patience, have them mark when the birds leave and when they come back in the seasons. If you want to teach children patience, have them put the little lines on the wall, how tall they are, and then look a few weeks later and notice they've grown, so that you invite them into the mystery of the natural unfolding. And they learn it because you feel it and you begin to trust it with them. You hold their hand and say, this world is trustworthy. This world wants you here as a child. You are a child of the universe, a child of the spirit. So you choose your intention, you plant a beautiful seed, you direct yourself to a creative project, to a visionary way of living, to a community, a family, a part of the earth, to something that is a gift that's given to you that you can give back. And then you see what happens. And to understand that is an enormous gift. Patience sometimes can be misunderstood as inactivity. If I'm patient, it means I'm holding back and I'm not going to give myself fully to something. But it's not that at all. Patience or trust is really waiting for the right season. Again, like surfing, you don't just get on your board and paddle. You wait for the right moment in the wave. Patience allows a kind of deep inner trust that we have the capacity to be with the matrix of life. And when you quiet your mind and open your heart and look to the mystery, then it's not even a question of patience. It's a question of being home. And you're home exactly where you are, which is where you always are, in the reality of the present. It doesn't mean that we don't weep. It doesn't mean that we don't care deeply about the losses in the world. In some way, as we become trusting, patient, more grateful, even grateful for the difficulties, we also allow ourselves to be touched more fully by life. And in that there is trust. In that there is a sense not of patience, but of presence that grows. Here we are in this vast ocean with the waves, and we're learning to surf. And as you quiet, how can you be anything but grateful? Grateful for the next breath. And someone who's sick knows that really well. Grateful to be able to walk and eat. Grateful for the eyes that allow yourself to see the colors of the world. Grateful for your ability to choose and move and respond, whether it's in difficulties or in opportunities. Grateful for the life you've been given. And this awareness, this presence, we could call it sacred presence. It is who we really are. It is your birthright. You don't have to be grateful. You are gratitude of the world expressing itself through you. You are the love of the world. Remember this as your true nature. Trust it. It is your home.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Harmonic Convergence 2020, Day 3. Leadership of Love, What Guides Your Every Action. I am Iran Zahavi, and I am honored and thrilled to be here with a very special guest, author, mystic, poet, and creator of the Gene Keys, Richard Rudd. Richard, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, and it's lovely to be here.
And you are beaming to us live from the UK, so I know it's evening there and late as well, people tuning in all over the world.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful to connect with you here in this time and space.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah. And, Richard, for those that may not know about the Gene Keys, can you share a little bit about yourself and about the Gene Keys and your teaching?
Yeah, sure. I guess about myself, I'm a very ordinary man, but I had an extraordinary experience back in the late 90s that kind of catapulted me into this role that I find myself in now. And in that experience, I, like some of us maybe have had glimpses of this, but I entered into the kind of unified consciousness field and remembered many things about life and myself and my destiny. And I guess it was a bit like having a download of the symphony of the cosmos. And perhaps like Mozart saw a symphony and then he had to sit down and write it out, right? So I then had to sit down after that experience. It lasted 3 days. And I had to sit down and then kind of figure out. It took me a lot more than 3 days. It's taken me until now, and I'm still doing it, to unravel this mystery of life and existence. And at a certain point, it kind of coalesced in me, and I wrote this big book called The Gene Keys, this big thick book, and I managed in some respect to get everything that happened to me in those 3 days into that book. But it's not the story of that, it's a code book. It's a code book of consciousness. And so it depicts 64 codes or codons, which relate to human DNA, that are archetypes of the evolution of human consciousness. So these are psychological archetypes that consist of levels and layers. So the 3 layers are the shadow, which is the victim pattern, and then the gift, which is hidden in the shadow, in the pain, in our trauma. The gift is a creative impulse. And then what I call the siddhi, and the siddhi is a Sanskrit word meaning divine expression. And that is a whole continuum. So through this book and this teaching, it's a way of understanding what human DNA is from a poetic level. And I'm a poet, really. I'm not a scientist. I have some scientific understanding, but essentially what you get from me is a poet's view of the continuum of consciousness as it manifests through humanity. And within the transmission of the Gene Keys is also a kind of woven, a deep prophecy. And it's not a kind of conscious prophecy, although it is on many of the pages, but it's an impulse that moves through the work of the time that we're living in and what we're moving towards, which is a more enlightened expression of our highest potential.
And that's wonderful to hear that you have such a positive message of the time to come, because there are many of us right now around the world that are sort of gripped or paralyzed with fear. And yet in the prophecy of the Gene Key, in your teachings and in your storytelling, you hold forth a really positive message. So can you share about that, of what you see coming and why we can feel good and hopeful about the time that's upon us?
Yeah, I mean, what I can give you is, in response to that, is something that I think every human being has it deeply embedded inside them. And there may be layers to move through before we reach it. But I call it a cellular certainty. And because I experienced it in the cells of my body. And it was a cellular certainty of the compassionate intelligence that moves through every human being and every possible cell of the cosmos, every rock, every tree, every animal, creature, star is imbued with this compassionate intelligence that has a purpose, a hidden purpose. And it moves inside us as well, and it moves through whole big groupings as well. So humanity is one group, one group consciousness. And the evolutionary impulse is moving us from this phase that we're in now, single-celled, almost a single-celled consciousness. Even though we're multicellular, we have a kind of single-celled experience. In other words, I believe that this body is mine, it belongs to me, and it stops here. And the next level of kind of breakthrough is the breaking apart of that illusion and the actual living experience of we're interconnected, we are one being. And that's not just a cute concept. The understanding that came through the gene keys is that this is a cellular change. This is a genetic change that's coming to our species, that's wired into us. The mystery of how it will come wasn't revealed to me. But the certainty of its coming was revealed and is imprinted in every page of that book and every word of my teachings in a way. And in other words, we kind of have to go there. There's almost no other way but forward. And what is clear though is that if you look back at evolutionary biology, you see that in the past, every huge breakthrough in species comes about at times of intense trauma. And it's the trauma that creates the upsurge so that the old can be shaken off and that the new can emerge. I mean, this is an old story, right? We all know this story. Mm-hmm. It's in every book and movie and everything. It is the oldest story. And we are actually at that threshold. We're approaching that threshold. It's beginning in these times. And I suppose what's a little bit unique about the Gene Keys message is this fact that it's actually a genetic change in the basic underlying architecture of our biology that has to take place in order that a new awareness system can open up, can come online, and that awareness system will allow us to transcend the illusion of our separateness. So yeah, it's actually a physical, embodied experience that's coming.
Hearing you talk about that so eloquently, I think about the process of a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly. And in that chrysalis moment, the caterpillar just completely dissolves, right? It has that liquefied process. And I don't know what the consciousness of that creature is, but I would have to assume if it were conscious of its experience, it would be excruciatingly painful to feel every piece of you completely turn into this primordial goop. And then the imaginal cells start to pop up. The one that says, oh, I think I'll be a wing and I'll be an antenna, come together and form, and then create the butterfly, which is the fullest expression of itself. And I hear that process as a just natural part of the natural cycle of a little bit of what's happening through humanity right now, that we may be in this chrysalis period of breakdown, but many of us are becoming the imaginal cells and awakening to the fullest potential of what's possible. And what I'm hearing from you is that you're saying that's actually happening on a genetic level of coming through us, of that type of transformation, and just part of the regular evolutionary piece of that. So that being the moment now, I bet a lot of people would like to know, well, great. When is it going to end? When will we emerge? When will our wings dry and the process can be complete?
Yeah, the immortal question of when. You know, in a way, when is the wrong question. I mean, it's a human question, but when takes us away from now, and actually slows down the process, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So worrying about when is part of the old way. You know, the new way won't concern itself with when. I mean, the image that I use with gene keys and that came strongly, if anyone ever gets my book or is interested, you can read the 55th gene key, which is the kind of prophetic one. And in it, I tell the story of the dragonfly, which is similar to the caterpillar and the butterfly. Slightly different because the elements are different. So the dragonfly nymph lives underwater for 3 years as an underwater predator, very successful predator. And then one day, because it happens quicker in a dragonfly, and I think that's relevant. So one day the dragonfly nymph, it does something completely out of character. It finds a stalk of grass or a rush or a reed, and it attaches to it and it climbs up out of the water into the sunlight. It's never ever done that before. It's out in the sunlight, and then it's clinging to this frond in the sun, and it's the sun that causes this mutation, this series of molts of transmutations. I should say that actually there are smaller molts that take place while it's underwater. There's several of them, but then the big one is when it leaves the watery environment and is in the air, and the sun starts to kind of work on it. And the heat is actually what creates mutation. You know, geneticists will tell you this. Like, heat creates transmutation. And so what happens is then the back starts to kind of split open, and the thorax starts to kind of uncurl. It literally uncurls, and then these 4 incredible wings come out. And what it is, that the way it works is it's the water of its old life that creates the hydraulic pressure that actually splits open the back and creates the body to unfurl. And just as the wings are finished, all the water is gone. You know, so the old life is actually the transformational agent that makes the new life possible. And then this thing is hanging there, you know, and it just drying, just kind of hanging, and then a puff of wind, and it's gone. And it's this marvelous iridescent kind of creature, this dragon, that is the most magnificent, you know, expression of I don't know what, but you know, it's so far removed. And I tell the story because the relationship between what was and what's to come is almost impossible to gauge. You actually cannot relate them. It's like the butterfly and the caterpillar. It's so different in every respect. The functioning of the new human is so different in every respect, from the way we view time, from the way we experience emotion, from the way we move, think, connect. It's all completely, everything we know is gone, in the sense of we carry with us our wisdom, but the old ways of understanding are going to drop away. And it's also a very swift process. As I understand it, it's incredibly swift in evolutionary terms. So the answer to when is coming soon. You know? But I don't know what that means in evolutionary terms.
Right, because the scope from a wide lens, that could be...
I mean, there are markers, you know, like 1987, harmonic convergence was a clear marker. As I do things in threes, right? I love threes and trinities. So I called harmonic convergence, and then 2012 was the second marker in the trinity, and I call that melodic resonance. And then the third marker is 2027. You know, so it's these 30 years, and that I call rhythmic symphony. And they're kind of markers for the transition, the beginning of the transition, in a way. So in those 30 years between 1987 and 2027, a lot of that old, the process you've described, the dying of the cells and the falling apart of the old structure, and just the beginning of the cracks to appear, particularly in these years that we're in now. And obviously we have one more 7-year cycle from this year, you know, which is a cellular cycle. So it's going to be a very interesting 7 years, I would say, coming.
And we find ourselves at this Harmonic Convergence 2020, to your love of the Trinity, 33 years from the first Harmonic Convergence. So obviously no accident. No. I love that dragonfly story, and I'm thinking, equating it to, as we do with all great storytelling, how do we take the analogy and apply it to ourselves as humans? So here we are, the dragonfly, we're swimming under the water, living our lives. And for us to become the fullest expression of what we are requires us to leave everything we know and to come out into the sun and to stand on that reed and then to break down. How do we know when to do that? And again, I don't know if when's the right question, but you know, with the dragonfly, I'm assuming you've, in your contemplations, have maybe thought about it. What is it that calls the dragonfly out of the water? And for us as humans, are we just going to know? Is it something that we need to be open to? How do we answer the call when it says it's time?
It's a great question. I think that it has two answers as well. One is that it's literally a sleeping gene. You know, one of my teachers called it the sleeping phoenix. You know, it's a sleeping gene somewhere buried in the backwaters of our DNA. One little trigger, you know, and no one can predict when that trigger will fire off in a specific individual. You know, and it just fires off when it fires off. That's part of the mystery. But what it does is it creates a quickening in that person. And my understanding is that part of that quickening is that the behavior changes. And the major behavioral change is you begin to look more deeply into your shadows. You know, you stop the distracting behavioral patterns of stress and what in the Gene Keys are called the shadows. You know, you begin to slow that down. You begin to bring a real focus into the center of like, why am I so damn uncomfortable? And why am I not paying attention to why I'm so damn uncomfortable? That's the trigger. That's the result of the trigger. So you begin to have the courage to look at your own pain and begin to kind of explore it with willingness and with openness and with gentleness. And that's like the beginning of the process. I think so in a way that was the other answer, that like the other answer is, well, it's the same answer. It happens when it happens, and it can happen from you hearing this conversation. It can happen at, you know, whatever inspires you, whatever triggers you to have the courage, you know, but it is a when, actually, because we go on putting it off and putting it off and putting it off until we stop putting it off.
Yeah.
And that's when the trigger fires, you know. Right. So it's a crystallization moment, really powerful moment. And as I said, there are molts in the dragonfly larvae, you know, in its earlier phase. There are molts, there are earlier shifts where we have a go at it. You know, we start to have a go, and then we drop back into our old patterns again. And then we have another go, and we go, okay, I'm gonna try and explore this discomfort a bit more deeply, you know, with a bit more compassion. And then we drop back into the old patterns. But at a certain point, we just go, right, I'm putting my sword in the ground and I am not budging until this thing has revealed what's hidden inside it. It's like Rumi said, you know, the answer to the pain, the end of the pain is hidden in the pain. You know, the end of the pain is hidden in the pain. So there's only one place to look.
Right. And that's a scary place for a lot of people to look.
Yeah.
Because so many of us will do anything to avoid suffering.
Of course.
And that makes me think about your teachings with the 38th gene key, the difference between struggle and suffering. And I think that is so relevant right now. Could you expand a little bit on that connection between those and really how it applies to what's happening with so many of us in the world today?
Sure. I think, when I use the word struggle in the gene key, I use words in a very precise way, as you know, very specifically, and then I open them up and I explore them, and then we discuss them with whoever's, and more importantly, you contemplate the word, so each of us contemplates that word and what its meaning truly is for us. And then that word, kind of like a homeopathic pill, you take the word for that gene key, if it's struggle, right, let's say, because we have these, in gene keys, as you know, we have these profiles, which also enable us to see specific keys that relate to us through astrological data. Not astrology, but through the gene keys profile, which we could get into in a little bit. So if you have 38, for example, as one of your primary keys, then struggle would be one of your words. And you would have to really understand what that means. And because it's just a word, right? But then when you take it inside like that homeopathic pill and you start to really contemplate, well, what does struggle actually mean for me? And you realize after a while what that is. It's a feeling, it's a vibration in your body that you want to get away from, you want to resist. It's very physical, right? The shadows are very physical. And so we do anything to get away from the physical feeling. So we'll go into our head, we'll go into our emotions, through our relationship, we'll go out through the senses in as many ways as we can, because we don't want to come back with the breath into the place where the actual struggle emanates from. So when we realize, it's just a feeling, it's just a sensation, it's not going to harm me, I don't need to fear it, it's uncomfortable, yeah, but then we stop manifesting the struggle, and the struggle transforms into something different. It transforms into a gift. And in each of the gene keys, there's a gift that emerges out of each shadow. So it's a bit like the seed is the shadow, and then as the seed cracks open, the flower appears and grows, and that's the gift. And then the flower eventually becomes a fruit, and the fruit is the siddhi. The fruit is the highest. The fruit drops from the bough, and the fruit contains another seed. So the seed and the fruit are very connected. So the shadow and its highest, and our, the very beginning of our struggle is connected to the very end of our, shall I call it, our victory.
So we cannot have that victory moment if not for the struggle. The struggle is a requisite, imperative part of the journey to allow the experience of the fruit.
Yeah.
The one cannot exist without the other.
Totally. And it's, if you actually kind of remove the charge of these words, they're actually just feelings, like fear. Like I have this expression that I do a lot of things. I do a lot of videos and things, and I do meditations that would often set to music. And one of the most popular ones is I use the expression "fear is safe," and people find it very soothing because they realize, I'd never considered it like that. It's safe. It's just you don't have to fear fear. You can go into it and feel it and experience it and surround it with this compassion and just let it live inside your body and inside your being. And when you do that, then you create this environment for it to transform, for the flower to emerge from the seed. So it's very beautiful. It's like it's a kind of divine joke, isn't it? That some god or some trickster up there thought, I'll give them the secret to the cosmos, but I'll put it in the last place they'll ever look.
Right, yeah. It's very mischievous.
Yeah.
Like very playfully mischievous.
Yeah.
I could, my own personal experience, and we chatted a little bit about this earlier. I had a significant change about 3 years ago now. Fell 40 feet in the middle of the desert. Woke up the next day in an ICU, paralyzed from the waist down. And not too long before that, I remember I kind of surrendered to the universe, and I said, you know what, I'm here. Let me serve. I want to be one of the 144,000. How can I help? And since that day, my life has gotten so much harder, right? And then it's like I said, I was with you. What's happening? But I hear something in that. I think there's a lot of us that experience these challenges. Those that really want to do something really positive for the world, really want to have a great impact, often are the ones that may experience the greatest challenges. So there seems to be hope in that from what you're sharing of the necessity of it. I know for myself, I kind of shifted the idea that I don't think that the universe is testing me. I think that the universe trusts me. And that is why we're given these opportunities to grow that can only come from the challenge. And so within your teachings and what we're experiencing now, is there any of the gene keys that you would think are really applicable for us to take some wisdom from, where you find the shadow to be very pervasive for many of us, so that we can get a glimpse of what the fruit might be that we're going to bear from it?
Yeah, there are some big ones that it seems to be triggering collectively, at the moment. One I've been talking about a lot recently is the 19th gene key, which seems to be a place where this mutation is digging in. And you see, the thing is, because what a gene key is it's a code embedded in all creation. So if you could see, if you put on a pair of glasses that could see, the crystalline structure of our being at the kind of base level, you would see these sacred geometries, these fractal geometries of which we're made, and these encoded mathematic signatures, out of which we're woven. And you would see that it's all connected. Everything is connected to everything else. But there are these coalescings of consciousness. That's what a human being is, a coalescence, as is a stone or a flower. So in the case of the 19th gene key, we all have this code embedded in every single cell of our being. Just as in DNA, the entire code of the DNA is contained in a holographic, form in every cell. The whole thing, right? The whole thing, which is incredible in itself. So when I talk about one gene key like the 19, it's in all of us. It's in everything. So a shift in one code is a shift throughout all creation, and it doesn't stop even at our planet. It can, this is universal. So the 19 at the human level, the shadow is called codependence, and the gift is sensitivity, and the siddhi, one which people find a difficult word, is sacrifice, and many people find that a hard word. And codependence is where we all know what codependent patterns are. They're where we think if we behave in a way that kind of is needing energy from something else or someone else and leeching off them, or in some way kind of competitive, that's creates this codependent connections everywhere. And it's a normal aspect of, embedded in human beings. We have codependent relationships, and we have these wounding patterns and these traumas that create them. And we know, from psychology, we have good understanding of them. Sensitivity is the gift, because once we begin to understand how those patterns work, and we begin to kind of separate ourselves out from those places where we're looking outside ourselves for the answers, we're looking outside ourselves for truth, we're looking outside ourselves for love. Once we begin to realize, that's a pattern that just really doesn't work. It doesn't work for me or him or her or any of it, or that creature, or we realize that actually we're in the next stage is independence. So we then become empowered, and every gene key, every gift level of the gene keys is an empowerment. It's an individual empowerment. So we suddenly step into the circle of our own empowerment, and we become more sensitive. And sensitive does not mean weak. Often that word gets, maybe oversensitive is what that means. But sensitive is just we start to listen, we start to attune, we start to become more empathic to our environment, to the different dimensions, to the ways in which people think differently, and it doesn't bother us in the same way as it did when we were codependent, because we no longer have those so many needs of other people to be loved and accepted or recognized or whatever it is we're seeking. So we stand in our independence, and then the next layer is sacrifice, and it's a big one. It's always a leap. It's the leap from the shadow to the gift is a huge leap, and the leap from the shadow from the gift to the siddhi is an even huger leap. But it's the same leap in a way. And the siddhi is like this divine field, and it brings an end to our struggle completely, and it brings an end to our sense of isolation and separateness. And that means that we have to move through a sacrifice, and that means we have to let go of something lesser in favor of something greater, which involves a sacrifice. And our entire planet is the planet of sacrifice. Everything sacrifices itself for something greater. That's evolution. So when we die, if we can make our life sacrificial in that way, that we give of ourselves for the sake of something greater than us, then we've kind of immortalized ourselves. We've assured that the energy of our, the energy of our species, but it's also the energy of our own directional soul, let's say, can continue on its evolution even after we've died. So what we're seeing now, I think, is many of us are going to be asked to make sacrifices, of all kinds, in order to pass through this next portal. Like, you have made a huge sacrifice, even if it was conscious or it happened to you, right? Mm-hmm. It was something, probably a deep, horrendous shock that you fought with. Maybe you still are, I don't know.
I'd say this, I wasn't planning on it.
No.
So, yeah.
But what lies on the other side of the sacrifice? It's like the dragonfly. It's like there's something incredible that is born out of it, right?
Oh, absolutely. There are gifts that come, and this is what you've been speaking about so eloquently, that gifts that can only come from the struggle, from the sacrifice, from the pain, like the lotus coming out of the mud.
Yeah.
And what I hear you talking about the 19 here, the codependence to sacrifice, is one, like you said, on the surface, maybe a challenge for people to understand. But as you've expressed it, what I'm hearing is the codependence is that I am dependent on you for my survival, up into the sacrifice that says I offer my life for your survival. And it's kind of flips it into the other way. And then the sensitivity is the awareness of being able to willfully shift that perception. And so does that feel resonant with the heart of it?
It's beautifully put. I mean, it's caught really beautifully by, I don't know if you know those C.S. Lewis novels, that maybe you read when you were young.
The popular ones.
Yeah, with the lion, Aslan, the lion, who is a kind of symbol of Christ, in a way, the Christ. Who surrenders himself, or in you might say Obi-Wan Kenobi is another contemporary example of, like, he surrenders himself to Darth Vader. He surrenders, and then Darth Vader cuts him down. And of course, he then comes back. He's reborn, stronger and brighter, as is the lion, as is the Christ, as it, it's the solar energy that gives us that kind of rebirth. So we don't know what, the whole thing about sacrifice is you don't know what you're going to become, but you give yourself willingly to the sacrifice that comes your way, and that shows you're ready, that shows you're really ready for it. And everything else is a preparation for that. And there are many levels, there are layers of sacrifice. Like taking it down a notch, because it's a kind of heavy word. One of the things I've been playing with recently is what I call magical thinking. And in order to inhabit magical thinking, you have to really kind of go back to when you were a teenager and kind of open up your mind and open up to the potential of other dimensions and all of it, from aliens and ETs to, dinosaurs and dragons and unicorns, and just really open up, what if all these things actually exist? What you ask these questions, what if, and you keep asking your mind, what if? And it's incredible what neurocircuitry opens up when you start to think like that. You have to not kind of make it your worldview in a way, because you can get caught in the fantasy of believing. But it's a way of opening up the circuitry of the brain, because we're very regimented by this rationalistic scientific approach, and which is wonderful, but it's very linear. So when we add the magical thinking, which in a way is what our indigenous cultures really hold. Like when you talk to those indigenous elders, they will express things to you in a way that blow your mind, blow the circuits of your mind. You're like, wow, I never thought of a rock as having an identity before, and maybe even having a kind of an impulse, an urge, maybe a destiny, those kind of things. They really open up, because there's a lot of wisdom in that kind of thinking, and it requires that we have to let go of other ways of thinking a little bit, loosen our thinking. Those are sacrifices that we have to make in terms of opening up our sensitivities. So I think there are layers and levels to it. It's also kind of playful. It's important that we're playful in this next, because things are intense, things are becoming intense, and one of the ways to approach intense periods is to approach it in a soft way, in a pliant way, with a loose mind, with a flexible mind. That feels like a good approach.
Yeah, that we could all use a little bit of levity now, and I guess that's there for us to create. And I'll tell you, this is such a fascinating conversation and so much wisdom to share. We're coming towards the end, and so I want to make sure that we give all the space to allow people to know how they can learn more about the gene keys. How can they find out their own profiles? How can they connect with you? And how can they apply this to their everyday lives in a time when it is so essential and necessary?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the easiest way is to come to the website, genekeys.com, and then explore your free profile. You can just go in and make a profile, and then you've begun a journey. You've seen your profile and you've kind of journeyed into it. It's a journey. This is not something that someone gives you and then they sit down and give you a reading like an astrologer or something like that. This is a journey that you have to take. And it's a journey that might take you years of contemplation. But I've also created many resources. Obviously, I have the Gene Keys book, which you can read up on your gene keys. But also you're gonna learn this art of contemplation, which is very beautiful art, that allows you to access the wisdom that's inside you. And you can use your profile as a journey over a period of time that unfolds in layers. And it's not just something, it's not thinking. Thinking is one small part of it. Thinking is what actually begins it, but then it moves deeper and deeper into our emotional life, into our relational life, into our family life, and into our working life, and then it moves even deeper into our body, into our physicality, and into our, into the cells of our being. That's contemplation. It has these layers. What I've done is created journeys for people, and we have a global community, and Gene Keys is being translated into many languages, and we've been offering these really amazing virtual retreats that explore the profile together. We have one going on now, in fact, and usually the first one is a 4-month retreat. It's a virtual retreat, which you stay in your life, you do your normal things, whatever you do in your life, but in the background is this incredible contemplation over 4 months that kind of takes you on this journey with a group of other people around the world who you get to meet and dialogue with and contemplate. So you can sign up for one of those, or you can, you may have to wait for the next one because we're just beginning the whole process of building those journeys. And but the other thing is you can begin, there's a lot of self-study journeys that you can begin. So you go onto the website, you'll find them. They're called the Golden Path series. They're really, really popular. And there are many people that just take the journey themselves and then start to share it with others. And it soon starts to take on a life of its own, as you know, from contemplating the Gene Keys. It's a field of wisdom that's sort of intangible. And there are layers and layers and levels to it. I mean, I've created a lot of stuff for people to contemplate and layers and levels for them to kind of go in and out, and different doorways and portals, and I continue to create different ways to contemplate the same material. Some of them very creative, some of them imaginative, some of them quite logical, a lot of different frameworks. So if you come to the website and you can get involved, you'll join the community, you'll soon, it doesn't kind of take anything, you just get involved. And there's Facebook groups, there's YouTube channels, all the usual things. I'm always putting stuff out. So, I recommend just coming and having a taste and having an explore and see where it leads you. Follow your intuition. And you'll probably have lots of questions. And the art of contemplation will teach you to take those questions back inside and let them germinate and marinate, and then they begin to find answers inside you. Not to say that I won't answer them somewhere else, and or that if you write to us, we'll probably answer you, because we're very good at that. We're very, my team are like really, we really like to relate to people, and so I would just invite people to explore. Start with the website and have an explore around, and check out my YouTube channel. I'm always putting out little small 10-minute pieces of wisdom on different subjects, and once you get into it, you'll realize how it works. It's a process that unravels from inside us. So it's a mystery in that sense, because the wisdom lies inside each of us. And the Gene Keys just provides a framework, like a structure or a scaffolding, for that process of birthing that we've talked about to start to occur from inside us. So that's part of the magic of Gene Keys. It's unpredictability.
Beautiful. And unpredictability in unpredictable times.
Yeah.
A message of such positivity and hope, and what a key takeaway, that whatever the challenge, whatever the shadow, it is the seed for the fruit to bear, and for the victory to be had, and for the new human, the new life, the joy to be created.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Richard, for coming to share that message with us at a time when we need to hear it most, and for all of your teachings and your offerings, generosity, we deeply appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. It's lovely to meet you and chat with you.
Welcome to the Harmonic Convergence 2020. I invite you to take in these magnificent visuals of Mother Earth, our home planet. When you're ready, close your eyes and bring your attention inwards. Allowing these sound waves to take you on an inward journey. Connect with your breath like an anchor, and take a few deep cleansing breaths, feeling the rise and fall of your chest and abdomen. Deep breath in and long breath out. As you inhale, drawing in fresh life force, prana, oxygen into your system, and as you exhale, letting go, releasing anything that is no longer in alignment with who you are. Allow the space of your awareness to expand, as if you are swimming freely in an ocean of sound. Set yourself free, as if you are shedding your skin. Leaving any old parts behind. As you are swimming through this ocean of sound. And as you look around, there are many other fellow beings with you right here, right now. Like a school of dolphins. Swimming, playing, interacting with each other. Notice how that feels to be completely yourself in community. And bring this sensation with you. Deepen your breath. And when you're ready, come back.
Hey, Ron, how are you?
Hey, Robbie. How you doing?
Good. Good. Well, welcome. Well, I'm welcoming Ron Guerin for the Harmonic Convergence fireside Zoom chat here. Ron's on the moon, and I'm kind of hovering over the Earth. So this is a perfect.
I'm virtually on the moon.
Yeah, you're virtually on the moon, and I'm virtually hovering over the Earth. So we're virtually set up perfectly for this conversation. So Ron, you and I know each other for, gosh, I don't know, like 4 or 5 years now. And I met you while your time at Worldview and doing some really fun stuff there, you know, creating trying to enable an orbital perspective, you know, by taking people up on a very large balloon, you know, I want to say what, 100,000, 120,000 feet, you know, so what a way to connect. And then, you know, I'm really happy with how our relationship's kind of developed and blossomed since then. And we stayed in touch. And yeah, I wanted to, you know, kind of talk about, you know, I know you have a new book that's coming out. You know, it's called the, actually, why don't you tell us a little bit about it? So
it's called Floating in Darkness, Journey of Evolution. So.
Great. Yeah. And then your previous book was The Orbital Perspective. Right. So is this kind of follow on to that first book, you'd say, or?
I guess you can call it that. It goes much, much deeper. So the orbital perspective was all about using the perspective that we have from space to inspire people to make a difference on the planet, and particularly to work together, to collaborate together towards to solving our shared problems and our shared challenges. So it was a book about planetary collaboration, right? And the Floating in Darkness, the tool that I use there is a autobiographical narrative to serve as a metaphor for the evolution of society, not only where we've been, but where we need to go. And I drew on a lot of experiences that I've had in my life that can, you know, map towards a lot of the development of society. You know, I was in the military for 26 years. I fought in combat. I was part of the mutually assured deterrence back in the Cold War. And so that highlights a lot of tribalism. You know, I've also done some things that just have incredible awe and wonder to them. I lived for 3 weeks on the bottom of the ocean in an undersea laboratory. I've been to space twice. I flew with the Russians, who were our former enemies. So there was really a lot to draw on. And this book goes, you know, much, much deeper, and I think is more powerful than the orbital perspective. And the orbital perspective, actually, both books are tied into this concept called the overview effect, where astronauts communicate a shift in perspective after seeing the planet hanging in the blackness of space. And I actually wrote the foreword for the latest edition of Overview Effect, which was written by Frank White, a Harvard professor. And in it, I describe the complementary nature of the overview effect and the orbital perspective. And so if the overview effect is that shift in perspective that you can have by seeing the planet hanging in the blackness of space, the orbital perspective is what you do with it. The orbital perspective is the call to action that comes from the overview effect. And then Floating in Darkness takes that, makes a quantum leap on from that jump off point, from that foundation.
That's great. That's fantastic. I got an early copy of your manuscript to preview that, and I'm totally enamored by what I've read so far. So that's really beautifully done.
Well, I think it's a message that the world needs to hear right now at this moment in history. And hopefully it's contained within a vehicle that people will actually listen to.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm excited to dig into that a little bit more too. And before we do, I want to kind of first give people kind of a life arc, because you have a really interesting backdrop and a background from how you got to become a member of one of the most elite clubs in humanity, right? There's only been over 550 as of 2016 astronauts or people that have ever been to space, of which you're one of. That's, if you calculate, that's 0.0000001% all of humanity, that's present today, that's experienced that level of freedom, that level of, perspective. But before you got there, I mean, you start off as a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and I'm sure that gave you all sorts of interesting, like, kind of lead-ins to how you got into fighting for the U.S. military to a civilian organization like NASA and seeing the world as one.
Yeah, I mean, I went kind of the traditional route to NASA. I was a fighter pilot and then became a test pilot, and then was selected from the ranks of test pilots to become an astronaut. But my journey to NASA started on July 20th, 1969. So that was, the day that we first landed on the moon. The first footprints were put on the moon, and I distinctly remember that moment in time. I was about 7 at the time. And just floating on a sea of possibility, realizing that I wouldn't have been able to put it in these words at the time, but at some level I realized that humanity had just become a different species. We were a species no longer confined to our planet. And I wanted to be a part of that group of explorers that had the opportunity to step off the planet and look back upon ourselves. And that dream came true about 4 decades later. When I launched into space for the first time on Space Shuttle Discovery. That was quite a spectacular day.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. Can imagine. When you were with the U.S. Air Force, when I read part of the manuscript, there was a point in time where you were involved in either dropping one of the nuclear bombs, when they're part of the arsenal, essentially, right? Tell us about that and what you were feeling, because I feel like that's so different from where you're at today. But at that moment in time, obviously, you're doing what you're taking orders, you're delivering on your missions. Like, what was that scenario look like?
Yeah, I mean, we got to put it in historical context. I grew up with the Vietnam War and with the Cuban Missile Crisis and all of the things that were going on, and, with ducking, in elementary school with duck and cover drills, getting under the desk and putting our, hands over our heads, and I remember being under the desk wondering, first of all, how is this going to protect us from a nuclear attack? And second of all, why would anybody want to kill us all, right? And so it was really dangerous times. We were going through as a species, I think, adolescence. I think we still are going through adolescence, but I think we're a little bit farther along on the adolescence. We're stepping onto the bridge into adulthood, I think, right now. And again, I mean, this is mapping. My life is mapping. I think every life, I think, maps the overall evolution of our species and of society. And so, my first assignment as an F-16 fighter pilot was in West Germany. And the particular base that I was at had a nuclear mission. So besides all the other missions that we did, we had to sit alert with nuclear weapons. And if an attack was ordered by national leadership, we were to take off in our aircraft and hit targets. And so I remember, being on alert, thinking to myself that I could potentially get into a situation where I have to make a choice between, dropping one of these weapons and causing, unmeasurable suffering and death and destruction on, a population, or not do that and potentially have, unspeakable death, suffering and destruction rain down on the U.S. and our allies. And so it was a really very, very difficult position to be in. I'm glad that we never actually had to act on that. But really our job was to make sure that the Cold War didn't turn into a hot war. Our job there was to make sure that didn't happen. There was this theory, and that's actually the name of the first chapter of my book is Mutually Assured Destruction. It was a theory that if both sides knew that there was no way that they could come out of this in one piece, that it would prevent either side from launching a nuclear attack, which history has proven that it has, at least as of today's date, it has. Yeah, that was a very scary time, and it was one where we were able to navigate through that and come out the other side still intact. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a great thing. I have to wonder, if you were given that order at your level of consciousness and awareness, what do you think you would have done?
It's hard for me to answer that because I'm so far removed from it right now. But even I mean, to put myself in that position right now, it would be a very, very difficult choice, right? Because if you're saying millions of people are going to die either way, either because if you're trying to stop a nuclear, if your target is a nuclear launch site, then if you don't if you don't destroy the nuclear launch site, then you are in effect allowing that launch site to launch those missiles. So yeah, I mean, it's a hypothetical thing, and
yeah, I know. Curious, certainly curious. Well, but I mean, but it's analogous to a lot of what's happening today, right, on the planet, where do we follow our leaders, who have different agendas? Do we stand up on our own with our own awareness? Do we just allow things to pass?
I think you always have to answer to your own conscience, right? I mean, and so to me, it's not necessarily a matter of orders. I mean, I'm just going to blindly follow orders. Are these orders lawful? Are they ethical? Are they moral? Are they going to lead to a worse situation or a better situation? All of those factors have to be taken into account. Is my inaction going to cause more harm than my action? In the long term. So
that's a really important point too. Inaction versus action, and then if you're taking action, it's not just following orders, not doing what you're told. There's other layers to consider, and then it's also the level of awareness that each of us has to know whether those other layers, how we're perceiving that, is correct or not, right? So a lot of variability there. So from moving from the military to going to NASA, I mean, you've orbited the Earth over 2,000, I think it's 2,800 times or so, right? You've been around the planet.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's a large amount of time. You lost count, yeah, after a while. Looking at the Earth, I mean, how many times can you look at the Earth in that perspective and then lose that novelty before you lose that novelty?
I don't know, because it never happened.
It never happened. Okay.
Yeah, I can't imagine that it would happen.
Yeah, and so that orbital perspective really it transcends novelty, and like our human nature is to pursue novelty, to keep ourselves engaged. So it sounds like being out there, if you're there for a few hours or weeks or months or even a year, you still have that awe kind of imbibed in you.
Yeah, I may have, now that I think about what I just said, I certainly never lost the novelty. The awe and wonder never ceased to amaze me and fascinate me. However, now that I think about it, we as a species are pretty good at ignoring awe and wonder. You know what I mean? And so usually what creates the most awe in us are unique things, right? Like imagine if only 550 people in the history of humanity had ever seen a flower, right? I mean, we'd all be pretty awed, and those 550 people would be probably feeling a responsibility to share that awe and wonder. And so, I think that awe and wonder is life's way of trying to get our attention. And people ask me, I was in space for 6 months, and people ask me, did you ever get bored up there? And I can honestly say I never got bored. If I felt bored, all I had to do is go to a window and look out the window, and the Earth was always changing, and it was always indescribably beautiful. And it's just, you're just immersing yourself in awe and wonder constantly. And and that's kind of the opposite of boring, right? So
yeah. And I mean, what was the longest time you're up there for in one?
So I flew twice. The first time on Space Shuttle Discovery, like I said, that was a construction mission. It was a 2-week construction mission. We brought up and installed the Japanese laboratory on the International Space Station. And then the second time I went up on a Soyuz spacecraft with 2 Russian military officers. And we actually launched on the 50th anniversary of the first human spaceflight of Yuri Gagarin from the same launch pad that he launched from.
Oh, wow.
And so that was a 5.5 month mission at that time.
Wow. So you're up there for 5.5 straight months with 2 other, people that are Russians.
Well, at least 2 other people. At times it was just 2 other people. At other times it was probably up to 11 maybe, because we had the last 2 visits of the last 2 space shuttles, Space Shuttle Endeavour and Space Shuttle Atlantis, with their crews that came up. And usually the crew of the space station is 6. Sometimes it goes down to 3, but it's usually 6.
Did you start to feel lonely up there after 2 or 3 months?
You start to, of course you're going to miss your loved ones,
Sure.
all the folks that you had to say goodbye to on the ground. You're with other people, so it's not like you're in isolation. Hopefully you get along with the people that you're with, which I did. So it was a nice experience to be up there with the folks I was up there with. But yeah, you're lonely and missing the folks that you love, for sure.
Did you have any emergency crises that came up while you were up there, or did everything go pretty smooth?
Everything went pretty smooth. We did have one instance, and it popped up on my, how Facebook reminds you of memories.
Yeah.
So it popped up on my thing today, and it dawned on me that I didn't put this in the book. And I'm like, oh, this was such a perfect thing to put in the book. So maybe the manuscript's not done. Maybe I'll squeeze this in. But we had a piece of space junk that almost hit the space station when I was on there. They made some made-for-TV movie about it or something. But we normally, if we get enough warning, there's systems on the ground, radar systems that track everything everything above a certain size that's orbiting the Earth, space junk. And normally, if we get if we see something that's going to get close to the space station, we'll get word on board and we will move the orbit of the space station. We'll raise it or lower it so that we'll get out of the way, basically. But for whatever reason, there was a very large piece of space junk that was coming right for the space station, and we being the folks on the ground, didn't realize it in time for us to move the orbit. And so all we had time to do was close every hatch on the space station. There's like 30-something hatches. 3 of us got into one Soyuz spacecraft, closed the hatch. 3 of us got in the other Soyuz spacecraft and closed the hatch and just waited. And we finished that. I think we had about 10 or 15 minutes to spare. And the object passed within, a football field's width at, traveling at 8 miles a second. And it was big. It was like an upper stage, piece of a rocket. And had that hit the space station, it would have destroyed the space station for sure. And so
Wow.
I guess that was the most what you could classify as an emergency situation, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, there's definitely movies on that type of stuff. So let's talk about the book. I think there's some amazing thoughts and ideas you put forth in this one. One of them that really struck me was this analogy or the story about Plato's cave.
Yeah.
And I thought it'd be great to hear you explain it from your thoughts, because I don't think me reading it does it justice.
Yeah, part of the point of the book is that when I look back over my life, a lot of my life, I was walking through life oblivious to a bigger picture that's around us. When I close my eyes, all I see is darkness, right? And the analogy I used in the book was the analogy of Plato's cave, the allegory of Plato's cave. And if you're not familiar with that, Plato postulated, the Greek philosopher Plato postulated that there are 3 or there was a group of people, I don't remember how many it was, that were trapped inside of a cave their entire life. They were chained to the cave. And there was a fire behind them, and the fire cast shadows on the cave wall. So all they knew of their universe was the shadows that were cast on the cave wall. And sounds that came from behind them would echo off the cave walls, leading the folks inside the cave to assume that the sounds were coming from the shadows. And so they spent their entire life, classifying the shadows on the cave wall and learning about them and becoming experts in the shadows that they saw. And no one had a desire to leave because they didn't know of anything better. But one day, one of the prisoners did break free of his chains and leave the cave, and he saw that there was a more beautiful, a more vibrant, a more real world that was just outside the cave wall. And he felt sympathy for the folks that were still inside and went back in and tried to explain what he had seen and to help them, free themselves and to come out into the world that was better in every way than the life inside the cave. And he was basically persecuted, because people worked really, really hard to classify these shadows on the cave, and they're not going to let some, crazy person come in and tell them that they spent their whole life doing something that was not as good as what it could be, because there's something more outside the cave. And so what I say at the end of the book, I don't want to give, spoiler alerts away, but I do say that I feel at this point in my life that I have been unchained from the cave. I'm still in the cave, but I've had the opportunity to turn around and see light streaming in from an entrance. And I know there's a world out there that I want to devote the rest of my life to exploring and to getting to know better.
What do you attribute to you seeing the light outside the cave, knowing that there's this other world? What was the inflection point that brought that into your consciousness?
I think there's a lot of inflection points. I don't think I can go back and pick one. I'd like to say, going to space was it, but I think going to space confirmed what I was already on the path to learn. I think a lot of seeds were planted when I was in space that have since blossomed. Really embracing the true nature of our interdependence, between our species and every living thing on the planet and the planet itself. That's pretty obvious from space, undeniable. I shouldn't say undeniable. I guess you could deny anything nowadays, but I found it undeniable and very confirming. And so, yeah, I kind of classify it as an epiphany in slow motion. It was just a slow epiphany that, first of all, it started with a gnawing that something was missing, and I didn't know what it was. And I'm still searching. Don't get me wrong, but at least I know now that there's more than what meets the eye. Let's put it that way.
Were you always? And I feel I'm the same way, where I consider myself a seeker of truths. I see you as the same way. You have this genuine curiosity to pursue higher truths. Have you always been that way, or did that get
probably at some level? I think we all are that way at some level. I mean, I don't think there's a person on the planet that's not seeking truth and trying to understand their universe more, a little bit better. But not everybody acts on that, right? And so, but I think that's been a part of me since I can remember.
Yeah, so there's a strong urge there, and you just found yourself in really interesting opportunities to keep pursuing that. It sounds like, right? One of the things in the Plato's Cave that struck me also was the idea that people's belief systems are so powerful that no matter how much truth you show them and they even experience, they still, many of them deny it because they're so emotionally invested in what they have, spent a good portion of their lives believing, right? So, how do we as a species overcome that? Because that's essential programming that's been programmed across our entire planet in various ways, through our government institutions, through our media, through our education systems.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot in the book, and I use a lot of examples from the space program. And in especially on the space station, we have really really detailed, choreographed, lengthy procedures that get sent up from the ground, and they all assume a certain starting condition. And I shared a story about how there was this one thing that I had to do. I want to get into the details, but I realized very soon after I got the procedure that it was impossible to execute, impossible to do, because it assumed the wrong starting conditions. And when I called that observation down and I offered a solution of how we could do it, it was met with a lot of resistance and hostility. And I couldn't understand why there was so much hostility. And there was hostility because somebody worked really hard on making those procedures, and I was just, throwing them out the window. And I tried to explain as diplomatically as I could that I know that somebody worked really hard on this, but that doesn't change the fact that because they assume an incorrect starting condition, they can't be accomplished. And the reason I think why there was so much hostility is because the folks in this particular case on the ground couldn't bring themselves to believe that the reality that I saw with my own eyes was different than what was in those procedures, because so much work went into those procedures. And so they were entrenched in their starting conditions. And I think that's one of the main problems that we see. People get so entrenched in their starting conditions that when facts are presented that differ from that starting condition, they change the facts rather than change their starting condition. And I think the reason for that is quite simple to state. It's a lot harder to overcome or to transcend, and that's our individual egos and our collective ego, in that we feel threatened by anything that upsets our delicate balance. Again, I think this is such a beautiful analogy. We've worked really hard to classify the shadows on the cave wall, and anything that upsets that really comfortable balance is a threat to our own identity, because we've identified with these things. We think we are our opinions and our beliefs, and that defines us. And if you disagree with my opinion, that means you disagree with me as an entity, as a person. And people get very defensive about that, and they put up walls and barriers and blockades, and that's why we have so many problems still, is we can't rise above that a lot of times.
So what I hear you saying is that our real issue is not the programming, it's our over-identification with our ego, so to speak. Our ego, being our thoughts.
They're interrelated, those two things, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess one programs the other, and then it's a feedback loop to the reinforcement to the over-identification versus, our ego being, it sounds like you're saying the egos are our thoughts, our expressions, our
that's
ideas.
What we think. Yeah, that's what we think we are.
Right.
Well,
right.
I think most people, well, maybe not most people, a lot of people realize that they are not their thoughts. They're that which is aware of their thoughts. But a large percentage of the population doesn't realize that, and I think that's a big cause of, because then if their thoughts are attacked, that means that they're attacked.
Right.
So
they take it personally, so to speak,
right.
like the being, right? So if you're separating the ego, so to speak, and that's the thoughts, your identification from you, what are you?
Awareness.
Okay.
That which is aware of thoughts, that which is aware of my feelings, and that which is aware of my perceptions and experiences.
And is another word for awareness consciousness, or do you separate those two? Yeah.
No.
Okay. So this state of awareness, or this I guess a state of awareness, state of consciousness, that's this entity that's overseeing and kind of using this mind body as a puppet almost, in a way.
I don't know if I would use that analogy as a puppet, but I don't have a better one, so we can go with that.
Okay. we'll bookmark that one then for later discussion. So if we are this awareness, essentially, what are we doing here?
That's a good question. I think the most straightforward thing is we're experiencing. I mean, we're experiencing the world. We're experiencing each other. We're experiencing love. We're experiencing beauty. We're experiencing all those things. Is there a purpose beyond that? I don't know. That's an excellent question. Maybe that's enough. So
yeah, maybe that is enough. In the Hindu culture, we refer to this entire thing as Leela, which is the great play or the grand play, and we're here experiencing this performance, this cosmic performance, so to speak, and then if we're able to separate our awareness from our identity, then it's more enjoyable than it would be otherwise, less suffering.
Yeah, we don't take ourselves so seriously, right? I mean,
right. Yeah, or personally. Yeah, take other people's actions personally. So this is an interesting thread because what interferes with this is fear, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So in the book, you talk about dismantling fear and how fear gets in the way. Why don't you expand on that? Your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, we can look at it in terrestrial terms, right? I mean, if we look at our problems and our challenges that we face, normally the default answer is we attack them from a foundation of fear. I mean, even if you look at something like climate change, global warming, right? We tend to address it, talk about all the horrible things that are happening, are going to happen because of the temperature of the planet is increasing. And all that is true. But what I found that does is when you try and address something from a foundation of fear, it closes the mind. It sets up defenses and barriers. It becomes a barrier to collaboration and cooperation. And the only way we're going to solve problems as big as that is going to be through attacking them as a planetary community, not as a single organization or a single nation. We have to come together as a planetary community. What prevents us from coming together and being an effective planetary community is fear. If we build our problem solving from a foundation of awe and wonder, on the other hand, what we find is that the mind opens up. We're open to different partnerships and collaborations and cooperations and I've seen it time and time again. I mean, I'll just give you a quick example. I have been in front of audiences where I've talked about really, really hot button issues, immigration, refugee crisis, environmental issues, global warming, and the demographics of the audience was a demographic that would normally not listen to any of that, and basically, would be very politicized, would have a bunch of just, pre-programmed, denials and counterattacks and all that kind of stuff. And I really thought that I was going to get, rotten tomatoes thrown at me, and I got what seemed like a 5-minute standing ovation. And it dawned on me that I approached all these things from a foundation of awe and wonder. The mind opened up, rational thought was allowed in, and we had a very good conversation about some really serious things that we're facing. And that is the foundation. And if you look at the space program itself, it's a perfect example. Back when we were getting ready to start the International Space Station and we were going to bring Russia into the partnership, there was a lot of people that said, how could we possibly bring Russia into the partnership? They've done X, Y, and Z. Until they stop doing X, Y, and Z, we shouldn't do anything with them. But luckily, we went ahead and we formed this partnership. And we formed a partnership based on awe and wonder. We each had a taste of the awe and wonder of space exploration. We found something that we actually agreed upon. We decided to set aside our differences and work on this thing and build awe and wonder together. And what happened was personal relationships developed, a platform of trust developed, And now that becomes a platform that we can use to jump off and address the things that we don't agree on. But we tend to do the exact opposite. We tend to take the things that we agree on and use them as a stick to force the things that we don't agree on, and that never works. But I think what happened in the International Space Station Partnership is a good example for us to follow. You know, if we bring that level, that example of cooperation and bring it down to the Earth's surface, I think we can solve a lot of the problems down here that we face if we can solve them, start the problem-solving process from a foundation of awe and wonder.
So how do you scale that? So on Wonder, the shared experience that you guys have at space station, there's only a few of you that are able to do that, right? How do you bring that down into a species level, governmental level, circumstance, which we're in right now?
Yeah, I think you do that by realizing that we are completely immersed every day, every second of every day in awe and wonder everywhere. We are constantly surrounded by awe and wonder, and we have learned to take it for granted. And I think we need to celebrate, one of the easiest ways to experience awe and wonder is through success, right? And to accomplishment. And I think we need to not be afraid to celebrate each other's accomplishments and to highlight that and to share it. When this picture behind me, this picture is Earthrise. It was taken on December 24th, 1968. And this picture marked an inflection point, I believe, between two human epochs. The old human epoch was all based on the two-dimensional map that hangs in classrooms around the world, a two-dimensional landscape of nation states fighting and competing over resources and ideologies, right? But this is the real world. And when we saw this with our own eyes, or the eyes of the Apollo 8 astronauts, we realized that we had an outdated map, and this was the real map. This should be the guidepost of our actions. And I think that was a turning point for us. And the Soviet Union at that time declared this picture, that mission, as a monumental achievement for all of humanity. So for a brief moment back in 1968, the Earth was one. The Earth rallied around this image of Earthrise. And it's taken us 50 years plus to really realize the significance and the meaning of this image, that we are one people traveling on one planet towards one shared future.
So the shared experience, from an image, so to speak, rallied the entire planet together, at least for moments, in the grand scheme of things.
We have a short memory and a short attention span, though. So.
Yeah, exactly. With so many distractions going on and so much divisiveness, how do we recreate that? So now the novelty of this image is kind of faded, obviously. What's the next image? What's the next experience that we can share with the world?
We are being bombarded by opportunities right now to do just that. I mean, there's this cliche saying, we're all in this together, right? Everybody's heard that before. COVID-19 has proven that that's not a cliche. That literally is the reality of our world, that we are intimately all in this together. There is not a single person on the planet that is not affected in one way or the other by COVID-19. I think it's the first time in human history that we have an undeniable existential threat that affects every single person on the planet. Obviously and undeniably. Undeniably is the key word there, because we have lots of existential threats. We just don't realize it. But this is it's a heartache, and it's terrible, and it's causing all kinds of suffering. And we're paying a tremendous price, but we can be getting a benefit for the price that we're already paying. We could use this as a way to come together and to unify. Again, we do that through awe and wonder. What's happening, what you're seeing emerge, is we're all being, the level of fear is rising so high that it's, above our heads right now. And we need to work, each and every one of us need to work to be beacons of hope and beacons of awe and wonder, and showing how we can work together. And, this is a planetary crisis. It's not a global crisis. It's a planetary crisis, because global doesn't consider people. People are statistics. They're a part of our workforce. They're a part of a consumer group, but if we look at it from a planetary point of view, first of all, we bring the biosphere of the planet into the equation. And we also treat everybody as a valued member of one human family, because that's the reality of the world that we live in.
I like how you differentiated planetary from global, and that's really important.
We don't live on a globe.
Yeah.
We live on a
No,
planet.
we don't. We look at them, but we don't live on one. Yeah, we live on a planet, and the planet also. I mean, global is kind of this more vague of a term where it tends to talk about humanity, right? But not the environment, not the biosphere, not the entire consciousness of a planet.
Global has everything. Global has completely everything upside down, right? Global is
Yeah.
our financial networks, it's our computer networks, it's abstract lines covering a sphere. But the reality of the world, especially, which is especially obvious from the windows of the International Space Station, is we live on a vastly interdependent biosphere teeming with life. But global, using the word global, treats everything, including the very life support systems of our planet, as the wholly owned subsidiary of the global economy, right? When it's exactly the opposite. Society, economy is dependent on society, and society is dependent on and embedded in the biosphere. So, you talk about climate change, you talk about COVID-19, the first victim of any of that is going to be the economy. So we have to get ourselves together. And global, you have to look at who's being served, right? So when you treat things from a global point of view, or globalization, for instance, so we started out with tribes, and then we got eventually through a lot of iterations we eventually got nation states, right? So your loyalty is your nation state, your problem solving occurs within the nation state, right? We've graduated from that, and we're into global now, right? So now, but if the citizens of a nation were the who the nation was serving, which a properly functioning nation, that should be the case. Globalization was mostly brought into existence through corporations, multinational corporations. Who are they serving? They're serving their shareholders, the stockholders, right? So if you shift from global, if we graduate again, and we've made the iteration from national to global, we take the next step of evolution and we get to planetary. Who are we serving now? We're serving the planet. We're serving the living creatures on the planet, including humanity, because we're all interdependent. If we lose the bees, we lose the people, right? Mm-hmm. Actually, the only species on this planet that the Earth would probably survive is losing the humans. I mean, if we lose the bees, we're not going to be around for a year from now probably. If we lose if we lose the insects, if we lose the trees, obviously we're going to. But if you lose the people, I think the planet will do just fine.
So ironic, right? I love that explanation. I think we're ready. I think it's time to kind of take that next step function evolution or a mindset of looking at this as a planet versus global,
So it's just a matter of expanding our tribe, right? We're tribal by nature. We just need to have a tribe called Earthlings, right? And Earthlings aren't only humans. So
and then the question is, how do we do that, or how would that emerge, short of us landing on Mars and establishing a colony there, so to speak?
Well, we've already said it. It's easy to say. It's hard to do. We have to transcend our individual and collective egos. And so, by collective egos, there's lots of those, but one in particular that we can talk about is national ego, right? So if we shed our individual ego and then just identify with some nation or sports team or whatever, or political party or news channel or whatever you want to do, that just replaces individual ego with groupthink, right? And it's actually more dangerous because groups get away with a lot more than individuals can get away with, and so we have to be able to transcend both individual and collective ego.
Right. So essentially, this idea of a collective consciousness, coming together and transcending. I mean, with the systems in place, there are systemic changes that need to take place, right? And then we need to put systems in there to reinforce this kind of elevated awareness. Otherwise you have the opposite happening. You have the systems dragging it down. We're moving up, but then we have things that keep pulling us back, which is what it feels like right now.
Yeah, I think unfortunately all we do is slap band-aids on things, on temporary band-aids on things, because it should be really obvious to everybody that the status quo is not working. Well, the status quo is working for a very, very select few. But until the status quo is working for everyone, we will not progress, we will not prosper, we will not come up with long-term, lasting, sustainable solutions. We will just simply slap Band-Aids, and eventually we'll run out of Band-Aids. So we need to build a system that works for everybody. And you know, it's within our power. We've proven it's within our power to do things that seem impossible. It is possible to lift the entire population of the earth out of destitute poverty. It's possible to have a world where nobody dies from preventable and curable diseases. It's possible to live in a world where everybody has enough food to eat and clean water to drink. I mean, we have come somehow to accept the status quo. 5,000 children die every day from waterborne diseases. Somehow we're okay with that. We're not filled with outrage. We're not saying this can't happen. Because we have a responsibility and an obligation so that it doesn't happen. You know, we produce enough food to feed everybody, and then some. There is not a shortage of food on the planet. It's just not distributed properly, and there's so much waste. We could feed the world with what we waste every day.
Yeah, so that force holding us back sounds like ignorance, right? Which is kind of the source of fear.
Ignorance is definitely part of it. Fear is part of it because it prevents people from listening and getting themselves out of ignorance, because their fear keeps them in what they think is comfortable. But all growth comes with discomfort, right? And you know, all growth comes with darkness too. I mean, we're in dark times right now, but you know, there's lots of analogies, right? You know, your mind is rejuvenated in the darkness of sleep. A seed grows in the darkness of the earth. A fetus grows in the darkness of a womb to become a beautiful sentient creature that's capable of pondering infinity and the meaning of life, right? And so we're in a dark time right now, but sometimes these dark times can have a purpose, and the purpose is growth and coming out the other side stronger, more unified than ever. This is a wake-up call. It's a call to action. We got to answer it.
Perfect time for a book called Floating in Darkness.
That's right.
This is the wake-up call. I wanted to touch on one thing you mentioned in the book also. You had a dream on the ISS.
Yeah.
Love to hear. Tell us about that.
Oh God, that's a long dream sequence. God,
give us the highlights.
Why don't you ask me questions about it? Because I can't. That whole story. It'll take 50 minutes to tell that story.
Yeah. Okay.
Give it justice.
Okay.
And I don't want to give too much away. This is
whatever you're comfortable sharing. So I guess in the dream on the ISS, you had this dream, you know, of a elevated humanity, so to speak, and the pathway there, right? Mm-hmm. Give us a couple highlights on what that looks like. What is that future vision?
Okay. I think that's more, the dream didn't get into that. The dream might have hinted at it, but later in the epilogue, I talk about that. I kind of touched on a little bit. You know, I imagine a world, you know, so we're at an inflection point right now, you know, and I used Earthrise as maybe where the inflection point started. But we have an opportunity to come out on the other side of this inflection point. But let me back up for a second. Let's just talk about this in biological terms, right? Most biological systems, most closed biological systems, which the Earth is a closed biological system, have a typical S-curve to them. So they start out really, really flat. They have a spike in population, and then one of two things happen. Either they reach a plateau and they reach equilibrium and they thrive, or they come crashing back down. And so for all of humanity, we stayed really, really, really flat. And then about in the late 1800s, we started up. And then we hit the inflection point of this curve right around the mid-60s, right around the time the picture was taken. And so the rate of acceleration of our growth started to taper off. So we hit that inflection point. And so, again, one of two things can happen. We can come together as a species and figure this out and reach equilibrium and plateau out and thrive, or the population can come crashing down. And so one of the things we need to do is completely flip the way that we think. You know, we talked about the economy, right? The global economy, you know, thinking that the biosphere is a wholly owned subsidiary when it's the exact opposite. So there's, you know, I imagine this future where, you know, first of all, let's talk about business, because I think business is one of the most powerful forces on the planet. It has the capability to either destroy our world by clinging to the old two-dimensional, you know, us versus them, conquest, competition at all costs, profit maximization at all costs type of mindset, or business can save our planet by embracing, you know, this new idea and to embrace the guideposts that Earthrise represents. And in this new business scheme, businesses would not be seen as independent entities operating in a vacuum. They would be seen as interdependent nodes in a fabric of prosperity where everyone has the ability to live a good life in harmony with each other and in harmony with the planet. A future where business leaders, political leaders, scientists all use the best data available they have. They all pool their resources and pool their ingenuity to come up with the best idea of what the result of our actions will be. If we pull this lever, what happens in 50 years? If we push this lever, what happens in 100 years? A future that's built because leaders take a long-term view on investment, on progress, and they're not driven solely by the next shareholder report or the next election cycle, but they start to think multi-generational, and they start to bring into the calculus, what is this going to affect? How is this going to affect our great grandchildren? You know, what goes out the window is this idea that we're only going to think of short-term things. So, I mean, those are just a few of the changes that we need to make, but there's so much more. One big one, I'll just throw one more out there, is in this new era, you know, no longer do decisions have to be secret to be successful. You know, no longer, you know, people can see how the sausage is being made, you know. So right now, you know, a lot of decisions are being made, you know, behind closed doors. They're not open, they're not transparent. And I think openness and transparency is going to be a really critical part to moving us towards this future that we want to see. And I think openness and transparency will also be an incredible economic engine. We will start as a consumer group and a people to demand it. You know, that we need openness, we need transparency from our political leaders, from our business leaders, and we're gonna exercise that through our wallets and our pocketbooks. And I think you'll find that corporations that do not have an open, transparent mindset, that are overly focused on profit maximization at all costs, are exclusive, you know, IP is exclusive only. You know, those companies are going to start to see themselves being left behind, and they're going to have to adapt, evolve, and take on a much more cooperative, much more collaborative mindset to be able to keep up with the economic growth that true collaboration and openness and transparency will bring. So I see a lot of positive things potentially on the horizon, but I see you know, those things I kind of look at as an immune response to what's happening. But the cancer is pretty strong too. So you know, each of those, you know, things that rise up, you know, tend to get attacked by the cancer at the same time. And the cancer is this selfish winner-take-all mindset.
Perception, yeah, the mindset. Change the mindset, change the world, right?
Yep.
Great. Okay, we're out of time, but before we go, when's your book come out?
Excellent question. I don't know yet. I'm trying to get it out soon, but I'm hopeful that it'll be out in the next 6 months.
Okay, great. And if they want to learn more about you, where should they go? Your website, your Twitter, or your
rongarin.com is a good place. I'm also on Twitter as at @astro_Ron. I'm on Facebook as well. On all those places. But the Orbital Perspective is already out too. So
yeah, so they can start with that.
Yeah. It's not as good, but
oh, it's good. It's good. It's good. Don't undersell. It's good. And Playing in Darkness is going to be even better. So, Well, thank you so much, Ron. I really appreciate
Certainly.
spending time with you again
It's
today.
my pleasure.
And
My pleasure.
yeah, look forward to more of these.
You bet. You bet. We just scratched the surface, man.
I know. We could go on for another 2 hours. All right, man. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
All right.
All the
Take
best.
care. Thank
Cheers.
you, Ron.
Welcome to the Harmonic Convergence Day 3, Leading with Love. I'm so excited about the conversation we're about to have that grounds that concept in science. We have Dr. Roger Nelson and Adam Curry, and we're really going to have an incredible conversation about how meditation impacts consciousness. Adam and Roger, how are you today?
Just fine, thank you.
Doing fine, thanks.
Feeling the love.
Could you, oh great. Could you introduce yourselves for our audience that may not be familiar with your work? And maybe Dr. Nelson, can you start?
I'm Roger Nelson, and I've been studying consciousness and ways of measuring the effects of consciousness in the world for about 40 years. It's amazingly a long time. I worked at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory for the first 20 of those years, or 20 some years. And then I built the Global Consciousness Project, which I'm still tapping into, starting in 1997. And we probably will talk a good deal more about that.
Fantastic. And Adam?
Well, I started off as a high school student as an intern in the Princeton Pear Lab, learning about consciousness research and, in general, a wider field of unconventional science that's not like the science that you hear about in your textbooks, but that's asking questions about phenomenally interesting things and getting phenomenally interesting results. And these scientists kind of became my extended family. My career now is as an inventor, but what I'm focused on doing is taking unconventional scientific discoveries and harnessing those to create new types of technologies, particularly things that people thought were impossible and things that can help benefit people and benefit the planet.
Thank you for your service. And both of you have been pioneers in this and measuring consciousness and talking about the implications of those measurements. Roger, can you talk a little bit about the Global Consciousness Project that you did with Princeton and why you decided to create it and what it is exactly?
Well, when I was in college, I guess, 1,000 years ago, I came across Teilhard de Chardin, who's a Jesuit priest and a paleontologist, and he just blew me away with a story of evolution which ends more or less with human beings, which are by human beings considered to be the pinnacle of evolution. And Teilhard said, well, maybe not. There is another phase, another stage of evolution that I think we are ready to enter into. And he called that the noosphere. And what that refers to is a kind of sheath or layer of intelligence for the Earth comprised of us. If we and when we get our act together, we will become an intelligence for the Earth to manage and maintain and sustain and care for the Earth in a way that up to this time we have not learned to do. So the Global Consciousness Project is a network of random number generators designed to, as best I could imagine, to capture evidence of this global consciousness or a noosphere coalescing. I thought 20 years ago that it might be possible that there's a little bit of something like an embryo or maybe a baby version of this noosphere or global intelligence that's that might be showing some signs, or we might be able to pick it up with sufficiently sensitive instrumentation. So I built a network of random number generators, which are devices whose future is not determined, and which can be affected by consciousness, by intention, or even just by attention, by being in the presence of humans doing something like becoming coherent or becoming resonant or harmonic.
Beautiful. And Adam, you said you were inspired by this project as well when you were starting out. Can you share a little bit about why, what you noticed and what the implications were?
The implications of the Global Consciousness Project and the the pair work or the random number generators, largely on which it's based, suggests that there's more to our minds and thus to ourselves than many of us have been told. In fact, that many of us think. It's an exciting discovery that represents, I think, where humanity is going to be exploring in the 21st century. And while I understand a little bit more about what that's going to look like as an adult, when I was a teenager and I first found out about it, I was even then sensitive to the significance of the discoveries, but I just wanted to be a part of it. And fortunately, I remember hearing about it from a friend's father, talking about the Global Consciousness Project and the Pear Lab. And it must have been sometime within 2 or 3 days later, I was in a bookstore and I saw a book that had fallen off the bookshelf. And I opened it up and I looked in the book, and there was a description of the Pear Lab and the Global Consciousness Project.
Sounds like a synchronicity.
It was a synchronicity that led me to it. And then I heard about a science conference at which Roger was speaking and at which the Pear Group was speaking, and found a way to escape my parents' house and made it to San Diego, and that's where I met the scientists.
And talk a little bit more about the other Pear Lab experiments that also enhanced and worked on what Roger was also investigating.
Sure. Well, what Roger did is sort of based on the pair work with random number generators. And why random number generators? Well, if consciousness is just an illusion produced by the brain, then it shouldn't be able to do anything outside of the brain, right? Meaning our thoughts are just contained totally within our heads. Now that's been the assumption, but you can devise experiments to test that. And that's what the Pear Lab did. So they took random number generators, which are not connected to our minds in any known way, and just looked at their behavior in the presence of human intention. And they found that the first thing they found is that they behave in a statistically significant and unexpected way under the influence of intention. And that's typically where people stop. But the real meat, I think, of what the Pear Lab did was all of the follow-on experiments, which explored how states of mind, how certain types of subjectivity, how things like love, how things like meditation, psychological aspects about ourselves are connected to the outcome of experiments. That, I think, is the more meaningful outcome, maybe, of the Pear Lab's legacy.
And Roger, you were sharing with me earlier too about the fact that we can measure these emotions. Can you speak a little bit about how that came about, what you noticed in the patterns of this research?
Well, to start, I come from the same place as Adam, with a kind of burgeoning understanding about the mind or consciousness being something different from what standard science imagines. It's not where our minds are not confined to the inside of our heads or to the inside of our body. They're not even confined to their mind. You know, the heart and the consciousness and the mind are all kind of a unitary thing. And what we tried to do in the laboratory experiments was to instrument something like as simple as intention. If I want to create high numbers, if I want to make a random number generator generate high numbers, can I do that? And the answer was yes, we could do that. And it's the sort of thing that requires statistics and lots of patience to understand. But the findings are very solid, replicated all around the world in different laboratories, different kinds of equipment, and so forth. But the point of all of these kinds of things is to discover what there is at the edges of what we think about consciousness. What besides what we see and hear, and what we imagine and what we envision is actually quite real. It seems like it's maybe an abstraction, but if I think of my mother, who died almost 20 years ago, she becomes real again. Now, there's a connection that's reestablished I smell the smell of baking bread, and things like that. So my consciousness is not limited to this moment and to this, very fragile skin and bone substance here. It lives in the world.
And can you explain a little bit more about how this random number generator technology works? Because they're random numbers, but you're also saying that with intention and with a certain kind of emotion, or maybe we could say coherence, in human consciousness actually changes the way the numbers behave. Can you speak about that?
Right. I think I'll start by saying that a lot of the people who we had and come through the laboratory to do these experiments where they tried to make the random number generator do something non-random, we asked them, so how do you do this? Or what's your process? And very often people would say, well, I have to become resonant with this machine. I have to fall in love with this machine. When I do that, then I have some chance of success at getting high numbers or low numbers on command. So a random number generator, the ones that we use for this kind of research, is a real physical device. It has electronics that's trying to push electrons against a barrier. And when you do that in the circuit, some electrons actually penetrate the barrier in what's called quantum tunneling. It's a completely unpredictable process. So nobody knows, not even the device knows what's coming next. But we sample the electrons that create a little voltage, and we change. When it's a large number of electrons, a larger voltage, we call that a 1. If it's a smaller than average number, we call that a 0. And this happens at electronic speed, so we can do a tremendous amount of such samples. And this is the very basic random number sequence that we create, which we ask people to change. Normally you get 50 ones and 50 zeros without some variation in a bell curve, but we ask people to change that, move the center of the bell curve this way or that way. People can do that. It's not something that is expected. It's not something that's easy to explain. In fact, I think it's probably fair to say we still don't know exactly how, but I think the human consciousness constitutes a field that extends out into the world and has effects in the world.
Wonderful. And I'm wondering how you can comment on this too, Adam, just the fact that the patterns also show a certain kind of order, right? When there's these intentions and impacting these number generators. Yeah.
Right. If you think about random, what it means is there is no order. That's the definition of randomness. You can't predict it. There's no structure at all. And when consciousness
it's a chaos field.
It's chaos, yeah. When consciousness intervenes, then we find, given the right circumstances, that consciousness has created some order in the data that we've collected. It's very interesting.
Now I'm really curious about what that means in our world today. I mean, we have experienced a lot of chaos and upheaval and what we're experiencing globally. How does that, what implication is that then about what we can do through intention, through meditation, that would impact the field of our reality? I know we spoke a little bit about this earlier, Adam. Would you like to expand on that?
Sure. So what the Paralab results suggest, and the results of many, many other experimenters, is that there's something going on with meditation. It's not just that you're quieting your mind. It's very likely that you're doing what consciousness does, which is injecting information and order into entropy and into disorder. There's one of our colleagues, Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, for the better part of 10 years has done an experiment which is based on the double slit experiment. So the classic double slit experiment, I won't go too much into it, but you have a pattern that appears with light that's either wave-like or particle-like, depending on how you choose to measure it. That's one interpretation anyway. What Dean has done is he's set up a laser interferometer, but he's had meditators and non-meditators attempt to visualize or to make a measurement to observe the behavior of these photons in this system at a distance. And what he found was that people that didn't meditate had no effect on the system, but those who did meditate had a very significant and obvious effect on the realization of those photons as particulate. Meaning people that meditate seem to be able to influence the world around them even at a distance. Now, we don't know how significant that is. Is it just at the photonic level, or are we talking perhaps levels larger? In some sense, I don't think that it really matters that much. You could make an argument where small effects that are quantum effects have this kind of butterfly effect that scale up into the world. But even then, I think that's missing the point. In the spiritual community, we're often told that we are a part of something much larger, that we are but a small piece of a larger family. And that's true, but that's only half the story. Because if that's true, the opposite is also true. Everything out there is inside of us. It is within us. And I think that's the secret, right? So when you think of your particular life circumstances, things and people that are in your world, and the circumstances that exist outside of that even, and you become aware of your thoughts and feelings related to those things, what you'll often find is that what's happening inside of you is also what's happening out there. It's not just what's happening there is affecting what's happening in here. So through meditation, we can begin to wake up to the subconscious thoughts and feelings in ourselves, and do the work to learn from them and to repair them. And in so doing, I think that is actually what can create change in the world through the mass meditations, right? Through the subtle activism. In other words, it's not so much that you are trying through meditation or intention, trying to nudge the outside world how you want it to be, but you're trying to nudge yourself inside in a way that you become the change that you'd want to see in the world. In other words, I mean, there's a reason why Gandhi says, be the change, why Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is within, and so forth. They're being very literal. That's
very literal.
That's where the work needs to happen.
And also just, it seems that as we do the work on ourselves, we show up differently in the world, and then we impact each other differently, right? A lot of your research talks about our interconnection and how we're being, or what we're giving our attention to actually is making a difference throughout the whole field. And can you speak a little bit more about that too, Roger?
Yes, yes. I think the implication of being able to affect the world in the form of a random number generator in a laboratory, that's the first step. It's a baby step in the direction of living in the world consciously. The human consciousness is a powerful instrument. If you think about just the act of prayer, how long have we been doing that? How long have human beings prayed? And I think the answer to that is something like as long as human beings have been thinking or talking to each other, we've been praying. And why would we do something that's useless? We actually tend to sort of winnow out the things that are useless and keep the practices which are benefit us in the world that we live in. So I think what we are in principle capable of doing is something like that. Live in the world as if what you think, what you envision, what you imagine should be the correct way for the world to be. So just live as if that is the way the world will be. Envision a future that's brighter, and it will be brighter. And I think if we can teach anything, if we have anything to teach from the work that we've been doing, Adam and the Pear Lab and the whole, there's a whole large number of people around the world. Unfortunately, not enough to break through the, the scientific taboos yet. But a lot of people are able to show data that say what you wish for is more likely to be than if you didn't wish for it, really.
Really. And also just feeling into the space of how do we relate to the polarities, right? The darkness and the light, the dissonance, the shadow, and love. And so you said something beautifully earlier, Adam, about really the only way to transmute that is to actually love the darkness, right? Love the shadow, actually bring attention to it, but from an empowered place, and know that we have that choice and that ability. Can you share about your personal experience you've said that you've had recently?
I use manifestation a lot in the business activities that I do. And so I'm thinking about it all day, and I've become aware of, I think Joe Dispenza said it this way: thoughts are electric, but emotions are magnetic. So your thoughts are something that metaphorically we're telegraphing out there. It's visualizing what you want to occur. But your feelings are the things that's going to attract those situations to you. What I had realized in the past 6 months was that there had often been an incongruence between my thoughts and my feelings. And by bringing awareness to my feelings and making sure that what I feel about certain things are congruent to my thoughts, that has been a tremendously effective manifestation tool. And I wanted to bring that up to share it with other people. Maybe you're at that point where it's good for you to hear it. I had a very interesting experience trying neurofeedback recently. There's a group of scientists for the past 20 years that have been putting EEGs on the heads of meditators, like Tibetan monks. People have been doing sadhana or spiritual discipline for the last 30 or so years. And there's two things that they found that are common among them. The first is that their frontal lobe, the sort of the prefrontal cortex right here, is awake, meaning it has consistent electrical activity and blood flow, and the back parts of the brain are quiet. And the second thing that they find is gamma, which is a binding frequency. It's like a carrier wave for all the other frequencies in the brain. And when it fires, the whole brain operates singularly, almost like a single neuron. So the two hemispheres, which I think are kind of like the dualities within our own head, are in that moment operating as one. There is a non-dual awareness or consciousness in that moment. And with neurofeedback, you are speeding up the process of enlightenment. Essentially what it is you have the electrodes on your head, and you see what your brain is doing. And through feedback, through vibrating pillows, through sounds, different ways of doing it, your brain can learn how to work correctly, how to lock into place and work as though it should. And when that happens, oh man, it's profound. You feel like you understand why people like Mother Teresa are running around trying to save the world, because they have a nervous system that has been refined to the point where higher consciousness is coming through. Now, what is the situation like for most people, myself included? Their brain, our brains, my brain is in a state of reversal, which is the back parts of the brain, which in general are concerned with memory, with scripts, with belief systems, with programming, very unconscious reactive thoughts, are steering the ship. And our frontal lobe, which is that executive lobe, the place that's awake when we're subjectively feeling here and now, presence, that's asleep. So humanity is like operating from scripts, basically, that we've picked up. But we have the capacity to become awake, to wake up from that. And that's in the brain anyway, that's seen as frontal lobe activity. And isn't that just the human condition, right? We have the equipment for enlightenment, but we're not there yet. And so I think by going inside, there's many things happening on different levels, but at the level of the brain and its connections through your body, you're becoming aware of parts that are closed down, are dissonant and not operating correctly. And you're beginning to understand, to learn from them, and to heal and restore them. And when that happens, you have all these very interesting experiences happen. But it really changes you as a person. I mean, this is really the promise of meditation and waking up to who you really are inside.
And also the journey of healing, you kind of alluded to it, conditioning, traumas that we carry individually and collectively.
Yes.
I know that a big part of my journey has been actually, confronting and facing my own shadows and my own wounded places, and actually doing that with a lot of presence, and a lot of compassion and a lot of love. And the pathway to that for me was meditation, and a lot of shamanic practices as well, and really just getting in touch with indigenous wisdom and realizing that we're all connected, and realizing that I'm not alone in it, that there are, that nature is supporting me, that life itself, there's an intelligence in life itself that's supporting us in the process of remembering who we really are, and getting that part of us that you said back online, that part of us that actually can access enlightenment, right? We have these receptors in our being and our nervous system that accesses an inner connection to all things, and it's just about making those connections again, rather than, and letting go of the old scripts that say that they're not there, that say that we're disconnected. What I'm really fascinated about by both of your work is really grounding this and showing how this is real and measurable. And I'd love to speak about, how do we measure love, and how do we actually understand the power of leaning into that level of emotion and living from that place, living from that heart-centered place. What is it doing to ourselves physically, and then emotionally, and also to the world? And I know, Roger, you were talking about the ability that you have to actually measure love and fields of love.
Sometimes, or quite frequently, people will say, will send me an email and say, "We're organizing a giant meditation, and we hope you will measure it." And I usually write back and say, "Give me some more information, but let me tell you that the very best instrument you have for measuring the effectiveness of your meditation is right here. It's in your heart and your mind, your own personal understanding and reaction to this business. But to do it technically and technologically is possible. I mean, we are, for example, in the Pear Lab, we had almost all of the what we called intention experiments, where people tried to get high numbers and low numbers, were done with a single person. But we started at one point doing pairs of people. And what we found was that the average effect of pairs of people was not so much different from the single individuals, unless they were bonded pairs, people who were in love, people who already knew what it meant to be connected, right? Those people, those pairs, produced effect sizes that were 4 or 5. My friend Brenda says 7 times as big. A certain subset is just really very different. And I think the reason that it's different and the more powerful is that, as I said, those people are already in a state where they understand the connection with another entity in the world. They're in love with a person. They can be in love with a machine much more readily, and they know how to do that now.
Well, what about people that don't have a partnership yet and don't have that established? I know, Adam, I asked if you were speaking from a place of feeling like an awakening to love, but it wasn't through a partnership. So what was it for you?
When you have the opportunity to play with a random number generator, what you're looking at is a graph on the screen. And if the random number generator is producing more ones, the line moves up. And if it's producing more zeros, the line moves down. But it wants to stay right around that 50-50 range. So your task, what you're trying to do is, let's say you want to make it go up. So your task is to make the line start to move up like this. Well, when you first try it, the first few seconds, it starts to move up. And then when you see that, holy cow, I'm actually doing it, typically what happens is it shoots right back down to the mean. We call this rubber banding, where when you see that you're actually doing something, you freak out, and it causes a very significant, actually, psychokinesis shift down to the mean. And you can learn so much about yourself watching you do this, watching yourself do this. What I learned from my experiences with the random number generators is that it's not about affecting the random number generators. It's about affecting yourself. And if you're doing it right, then you see the results on the random number generators that you want to see. So how do you affect yourself? Well, one way to affect yourself is to bring humor into what you're doing. When you bring humor into, this task, you relax, you permit yourself to get the results that you want. It's not so serious, and the results that you want come. Another way is love. What we talk about subjectively as love is clearly a very profound effect that you can have on yourself. And to me, it's been, I don't know, it's really situation dependent, but sort of bringing love and humor into the thoughts and feelings that I have that are maybe frustrated thoughts and feelings, or feelings of want, or the types of things that happen in our normal life. What's funny is that when I do that, it's like that day or the next day or that week, something will happen that is a crazy synchronicity that comes out of nowhere, that's totally related to the change that I just made inside of me.
And that's the order that we're talking about, right? Or another word for order would be coherence. That the more we're like in sync within ourselves, is what I'm hearing you say, right? The more we start to feel experiences of synchronicity and alignment and resonance, and we're just magnetically, you're talking about manifestation, magnetically drawing to us these incredible experiences that are lighting us up even more. There's almost like a like attracts like happening there, right? So knowing that, and knowing the experiment that we're doing with the harmonic convergence, what would you say is the most effective thing that everybody out there can do, all of us here can do individually, to impact the results of this, to actually have this experience, this collective experience of awe, and call that in? Like, what is it that we would need to do?
The first thing, I'm no expert, but here's what I'm doing. The first thing is to be aware of how you actually feel about a change that you want to make in the world. Let's say you identify some change that you want to make. You want yourself to change, is really what you're saying. For example, if you're feeling outrage and injustice, you're probably going to create more outrage and injustice, either through your actions or through influencing events that come to you, etc. It's easy to do all the time, but try to understand that maybe the people or the situations in the world that you disagree with, or that you see as causing these problems, are also inside of you. You have that very ability to do those same things that you're fighting against. Shine the light on that and recognize it, and see you in the other people or the other situations that you wish to change, and start changing that inside yourself. That's all you got to do. Again, it's not so much that you're affecting the outside world, it's that you're doing the work inside, and the outside world is sort of like this projection. Now, I can get crucified for saying that, because there's all these caveats and exceptions, but this is just what I'm doing. One thing that's allowed me to do that is to ask for forgiveness for bad situations in the world. Obviously I didn't cause them, but maybe I did. They're in my reality. So
it's like taking mutual
yeah,
responsibility,
exactly.
right?
Taking responsibility for it. And when you do that, you can start to see where the other side is coming from as well. And you can maybe meet them in a place that is from that, it's from a higher place where like unification can happen. If that makes sense. It's very abstract, but.
I totally understand. And I also, this is reminding me of something you've shared, Roger, about the reason you even began this research and the impact of indigenous wisdom on your life and seeing, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, when I was very young, I wanted to be a Sioux Indian, a Lakota, and that turned out not to be feasible. But along the way, I had a chance to learn from the people who actually knew how to live on the earth. Basically, I think what they were doing is, in general, was very much respecting the world around them, respecting each other. As Adam said so nicely, there are quibbles that people will can bring up, and maybe I'll get in trouble for saying the indigenous peoples on this land knew how to do it. But I think they did, and I think the core of their understanding was that if we envision what should happen and then accept what does happen, it will often match. There's a kind of magic that happens when I allow the world to enter into my consciousness, rather than attempting to push my version of the world onto the world itself. So I live in, and I need to understand that I'm respectfully connected to that world, and I forgive myself if I'm not doing it very well, and then get back to business. It's like the first lessons in meditation. Most meditation teachers will say, so you think you're not doing it very well, you're not doing it right? Don't think that, just go back to doing it. Just sit.
I love that you both, in that beautiful sharing, you both brought up forgiveness, and that once we become aware of this interconnection and the impact that we have on each other, and we can bring more responsibility and respect towards that, but also not beat ourselves up and forgive each other, forgive ourselves. And it's reminding me of the indigenous wisdom from Hawaii. Actually, there's a prayer core to their belief called Ho'oponopono, which basically translates to a prayer of deep reverence and respect for all life that speaks into that through saying, please forgive me, I'm sorry, I love you, thank you. And just repeating that over and over, but literally from a place of, I'm actually speaking to like all of life and existence itself, all the forms and expressions of life, and all the ways that I'm interconnected, and all the things that I do unconsciously that can affect that field. But then taking responsibility actually brings you back into alignment and allows you to find the synchronicity and resonance again. So I'm curious what you two feel about that idea and that perception of the world.
Totally.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Totally. I mean, what could be wrong with that? I can't repeat the 4 things you said, but that sequence of words of wisdom really sums it up so beautifully.
Yeah, and I believe it's encoded too. There's like layers to that. I mean, what does each layer say? It's like, please forgive me is taking responsibility, right? I'm sorry is like realizing the impact and choosing differently. I love you is that we're recognizing we're in a field of interconnection and love no matter what.
Yes.
And we can stay in that connection no matter what. And and thank you is that, I think you've said this too, that thank you or gratitude is the most powerful sort of thing that catalyzes and spikes in greater order, right? In the number generators, is this sense of gratitude. Yeah, just
gratitude,
completely envelops all of
appreciation,
it.
love, compassion, all of those kinds of things, which are, you might say, the highest emotions that we experience. All of them connect us to each other, and they connect us to these strange little devices, they're random number generators, in such a way that they become part of us, and they, in a sense, do our bidding to express something about the loving connection that we're talking about. It's amazing.
And they're kind of like little mirrors, right? They're just mirroring and feeding back to us what we're putting out in the world, which is really powerful because then it allows us to become more self-aware of our impact.
Yeah.
And
so you better be good wherever you go, because there you are.
And on that note, do you want to share a little bit more about what both of your impressions are about what we're doing with the Harmonic Convergence and this intention to really come together and in greater coherence and meditation to recognize our interconnection with all life on Earth and outside of Earth?
Well, let me say just a word or two, Adam, then you
Sure.
can go. I've been paying attention to the Harmonic Convergence longer than a lot of our listeners might be alive. You know, it's I think it started more than 30 years ago, and it's mutated over the years. But it's the same basic notion of bringing us all in harmony together, so that we can become a part of an envisioned world which is brighter, more harmonious, and better for all living things. It's a very beautiful kind of intention, which gathers more and more people into it. And the more, one of these days we'll have everybody, right?
And do we need everybody to make an impact right now? I mean, there's the Maharishi effect, right? With the 1%, I believe, or less than 1% would actually catalyze a ripple effect throughout consciousness and kind of up-level everyone at once. What do you have to say about that?
Oh, yeah. Adam, why don't you speak? I have lots to say, but too much.
Yeah. Well, perhaps this is an artful way of dodging the question. But I'm really good at that. So it's the question of at what point do we see change in society, right? If there's enough people, and there's numbers or percentages that are thrown around. But I'm reminded of the story of Siddhartha, who became the Buddha, and he had spent 9 years on a quest to become enlightened. And the first 5 years were tremendously difficult, right? Begging for food and seeking the guidance of masters in different parts of his country. And eventually he said, I've had enough. I'm just going to sit down right here under this Bodhi tree, and I'm either going to pass away or I'm going to become enlightened. But it's one of those two things. And for 4 years, I think it was 4 years, for 4 years he sat there and he meditated. There had been people that have heard of what he was doing that came to seek a wisdom from him, to seek enlightenment from him. And so at some point he had a ring of disciples, many of whom had followed him in his very, very difficult journey. And all in a moment, he got it. He became enlightened. And he had realized that all he had to do was to wake up in the present moment, right? Because that's all there is. There was it wasn't a numbers game. It wasn't how many years did he put into it, but it was a decision to change and an awakening to the present moment. And that's where it happened. Now, his disciples around him started to see his face grinning, and they thought, aha, he's got it. Finally, he's become enlightened and he has the secret. So they were eagerly waiting for him to open his eyes and reveal the teaching, right? To tell us the final truth so that we too may become enlightened. And Siddhartha opened his eyes and said, I'm hungry. Let's cook something. And of course, they were tremendously disappointed. They had followed him for years through this journey, and the moment he became enlightened, they all left.
Yep. There's a Buddhist saying: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water.
That's right. Yep. So
That's right.
These things have a way of unfolding in a moment within us.
I think we're calling in that kind of a moment right now, in every moment of this event, turning a moment into a movement and catalyzing a mass awakening here to deeper truths of who we really are, what we're really connected to, and what the nature of reality is, and really appreciate your all of it you've offered today on deepening that conversation. And would love to give you the opportunity to just, if there's anything left that you really would like to share, and even just speaking about how people can track your latest projects that are up and coming. Yeah, please share with us.
Go ahead, Adam.
Sure. Well, if I could leave us with anything, it would just be to meditate daily. Just make sure you're doing that. Speaking of Buddha means to transcend the intellect. It really means to become aware of awareness, which is a level above thoughts. And related to what we're talking about in our brains, where we have sort of memories and scripts and prejudices and biases and all these things that are controlling our thoughts. Simply meditating 20 minutes a day can help us peak above that and to start to see truth the way, to start to see more truth, basically, and to not be driven by the scripts of which we may or may not even be aware. So that would be what I would leave everyone with. I post updates.
And you also have a project. You have an app that you're working on that also helps us engage more and work with consciousness. Would you like to speak about that?
Right. So some years ago, myself and a number of other people in the consciousness research community, Roger included, kind of came together around this idea of creating a mobile app called Entangled, which would create a random number generator on every user's phone, so that we could expand the concept of the Global Consciousness Project from 100 odd random number generators spread around the world to hundreds of thousands or more running in everybody's smartphone. So we've built a couple of different prototypes, and we've had some beta tests, some of which were actually quite successful. But you can learn more, just go to entangled.org or search Consciousness app, and it's the first thing that comes up. I also do research updates on Twitter, Adam's Lab, or you can just search my name.
Thank you, Adam. And Roger, I want to also invite you to share that Roger's going to be measuring the impact of the harmonic convergence on consciousness.
Not so much Roger as the network is running. The data are being collected as we speak. And if the feelings that we have are any guide, I mean, I'm catching or inhaling a kind of very, very big network of people around the world who are looking for a harmonious engagement. Anyway, I'll take a look at the data and I'll report somewhere, somehow. I have a Facebook page on which I mount such things.
Well, we also are going to be putting together the data on a page of our site, of a partner site, along with the data that we're actually capturing through the contact surveys. You can look at the chat below, and also on our website. We're going to be sharing what are we all actually believing is possible during this event, and also how many of us have already had contact experiences. And this is a way to actually really reflect back, this large group that's coming together, and bring back the numbers that really haven't been reported before. So we're super excited about that and really encourage everyone taking this survey. And you can go to newstory.earth to see some of the results. We'll be posting those in the near future, probably within the next 24 hours. And then the ones that Roger's going to give us will be received closer to the end of the event. We're so grateful for your collaboration on that, Roger. And thank you for being here, Adam.
You're welcome. But let me say one final thing, if I may.
Please.
We are connected to each other in ways that we don't understand and don't perceive normally. And I think one of the very best things we could do, and one of the best tools for doing that, well, there are actually 3 or 4. One's meditation, one is just love and appreciation. But the thing that we need to do is to bring that unconscious connection up into awareness. And when we do that, we will have a harmonic convergence.
Thank you, Roger. That's so well said. And thank you, everyone. Please stay in tune and in touch with all the other amazing speakers we're going to be bringing and all the other opportunities to engage, including the after party, which starts right now. Thank you.
We're the first generation to be conscious of evolution, to be conscious we're affecting our own evolution. The amazing thing is that only recently did we discover cosmogenesis. We thought the universe was static or eternal. And when these scientists saw the background radiation of that first flaring forth and could identify it as the beginning of this existing universe, our sequence is a continual rise of complexity and consciousness from single cell to multicell to animal to the early humans, always in the direction of greater complexity and greater consciousness. And now that that process has become self-aware, it has been, is now evolving, and we are part of the evolution. When you're tapping into the impulse of creation itself, you can trust yourself. You don't doubt. You don't analyze. You don't see if it's right or wrong, but you get a feeling of flow. The possibility of radical connectivity of innovations, creativity, and people's heart's desire to do their work, to be creative, to express their unique potential, is the force that's going to evolve the universe.